Hey guys! Tonight we're slipping on our finest kid leather gloves and stepping into a world where your bare hands could destroy your reputation faster than any scandal. You're standing in the grand entrance hall of Buckingham Palace, your palms already sweating beneath layers of silk and cotton, knowing that one wrong move with your gloves could see you banished from society forever. The year is 1885, and you've just received the summons every ambitious Victorian dreamed of and feared in equal measure an invitation to appear before Queen Victoria herself. You clutch your reticule a little tighter, feeling the extra pair of pristine white gloves tucked inside like a security blanket. Around you, other guests whisper nervously, their gloved hands fidgeting with fans, adjusting brooches, smoothing already perfect skirts. Everyone here knows the unspoken rule that governs this glittering world your gloves stay on, until the Queen herself gives permission otherwise. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why your great-grandmother's portraits always show her in gloves, even indoors, even in summer, even when logic screamed that she must be roasting alive. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, or share your favourite piece of bizarre historical etiquette. Maybe you've got your own family stories about strict dress codes that seem ridiculous now, but were deadly serious then. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible, turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You take your first tentative steps deeper into the palace, and immediately you understand why gloves became the obsession of an entire era. Every surface gleams polished marble, gilded frames, mirrors that reflect your nervous face back at you 100 times. Your gloved hands leave no marks, no smudges, no evidence of your mortal, sweaty existence. This is the magic of gloves in Victoria's world. They create a barrier between imperfect humanity and the pristine ideal of royalty. The footman guiding you doesn't speak, but his own white gloves practically glow in the dim corridor light. You notice how he opens doors without actually touching them, using just his fingertips through the fabric. It's a dance you're learning step by step how to exist in this world without leaving traces, without contaminating the purity that surrounds the monarch. In the antechamber, you spot Lady Pemberton, who made her debut 3 seasons ago. She's adjusting her daughter's gloves for the 40th time, tugging at the tiny pearl buttons that march up the girl's forearm like soldiers. "Remember," she hisses, quiet enough that you almost miss it. The Queen notices everything. If your gloves wrinkle, if they bag at the fingers, if there's even a hint of a stain, she'll see it. And she'll remember. This isn't paranoia. This is survival. You've heard the stories. Of course. Everyone has. The Marchioness of Salisbury's niece who developed a nervous rash and removed her gloves during a garden party. Thinking no one would notice in the crowd, the Queen noticed. The girl never received another invitation to court. Her marriage prospects withered. She eventually wed a country vicar and spent the rest of her life in rural obscurity, all because she couldn't keep her gloves on for 3 hours. Or the tale of Lord Ashford, who lost a glove in a carriage accident on his way to a royal function. Rather than appear with one gloved hand and one bare, he turned his carriage around and missed the event entirely. His explanation was accepted. His absence was forgiven. Because everyone understood better to miss the Queen than to stand before her with naked hands like some common labourer. The rules governing gloves extend far beyond simple cleanliness, though Victoria's famous obsession with hygiene certainly plays a role. You've read accounts of her inspecting the gloves of her ladies-in-waiting like a general reviewing troops. White gloves that weren't pristinely white received lectures. Gloves with loose stitching suggested moral looseness. Gloves that fit poorly indicated a poorly disciplined mind. But there's something deeper here. Something that makes your modern sensibilities both laugh and shudder. The Victorians believed that character showed itself in every detail. Your gloves weren't just accessories, they were proof of your self-control, your attention to propriety, your willingness to suffer for the sake of social order. Removing them prematurely showed weakness, suggested you valued personal comfort over collective standards. Historians still argue whether Victoria's glove obsession stemmed from genuine concern about disease transmission or from her need to maintain rigid control over her court. Some point to the cholera outbreaks of her early reign and suggest the Queen became fixated on barriers between people and germs. Others note that her glove rules grew stricter after Prince Albert's death, as if she was literally trying to keep the world at arm's length, separated from her grief by layers of fabric. You're ushered into a receiving room where portraits of Victoria's ancestors stare down at you, every painted hand properly gloved, even in oils and canvas. The message is clear: this is how civilized people present themselves. This is how power dresses itself. This is the uniform of those who matter. A quirky fact floats through your anxious mind, something you read in a ladies' magazine last month. Apparently, the Queen employs 3 full-time glove inspectors whose sole job is to examine every pair of gloves worn by anyone entering the royal presence. These inspectors work in a basement room you'll never see, using magnifying glasses to check for repairs, stains, or inferior materials. Gloves that fail inspection are confiscated on the spot, and the unfortunate owner is sent home in disgrace. The absurdity almost makes you giggle, but you swallow it down. Nothing is absurd in Victoria's realm. Everything is deliberate. Everything means something. Your hands are starting to ache inside your gloves. The seams press against your knuckles. The fabric stretches too tight across your palm when you flex your fingers. You imagine hours ahead of you, maintaining this uncomfortable perfection, never scratching an itch, never wiping away the perspiration you feel gathering at your temples. Welcome to Victorian court life, where your clothing wears you, and a simple accessory becomes a test of your worthiness to breathe the same air as royalty. The glove rules you're about to navigate make modern dress codes look like gentle suggestions. They reveal a society so obsessed with propriety that it literally couldn't handle the sight of human skin in formal settings. And you're just beginning to understand why. You watch as a lady-in-waiting approaches the small gathering in the antechamber, her expression serene but her eyes sharp as cut glass. She's holding what looks like a simple white handkerchief, but you know better. This is the instrument of the infamous white glove test, and your stomach tightens as she begins making her way down the line of waiting guests. The test is deceptively simple. She'll run that pristine handkerchief across the palm and fingers of your gloved hand. If even a hint of dirt, powder, or discoloration transfers to the white fabric, you fail. And failure here doesn't mean a polite suggestion to freshen up, it means immediate dismissal from the Queen's presence. A black mark against your name in the court records, and weeks of whispered gossip in every drawing room from Mayfair to Manchester. You've prepared for this moment with the dedication of a soldier preparing for battle. Last night, you washed your hands 7 times with carbolic soap. This morning, you donned your gloves in a room you'd cleaned yourself, not trusting even your most loyal maid to ensure perfect conditions. You've touched nothing, not a door handle, not a railing, not even your own face since pulling on these kid leather sheaths that cost more than most families earn in a month. The lady-in-waiting reaches the woman beside you, Lady Hartwick, whose gloves appear immaculate. The handkerchief sweeps across her right hand once, twice. The lady-in-waiting's face reveals nothing, but she moves on. Lady Hartwick exhales so quietly you almost miss it. She's passed. Now it's your turn. You extend your right hand, trying to keep it from trembling. The handkerchief feels like a whisper against your glove, barely there, yet somehow you're convinced it's detecting every imperfection, every microscopic failure of your preparation. The lady-in-waiting's eyes flick to the fabric, then to your face. A pause that stretches into eternity. Then she nods, almost imperceptibly, and moves to the next person. You've passed the white glove test. Your heart hammers with relief so intense it borders on ridiculous. You've proven yourself worthy of standing in the same room as the Queen, at least in terms of hand cleanliness. It feels simultaneously like a monumental achievement and the most absurd accomplishment of your life. The young man 3 places down the line isn't so fortunate. When the handkerchief lifts from his glove, there's a faint grey smudge visible even from where you stand. His face goes whiter than his apparently inadequate gloves. The lady-in-waiting doesn't speak, doesn't scold. She simply gestures to a footman, who materializes as if from thin air and escorts the unfortunate gentleman out through a side door. You'll later hear he was the 3rd son of an earl, and this failure derailed his hopes of a position in the diplomatic service. The Queen's network of informants is vast, and word of failed glove inspections travels faster than telegraph signals. But why this obsession with white gloves specifically? You've wondered about this, and so have countless others. The practical answer involves visibility. Dirt shows immediately on white fabric, making it impossible to hide poor hygiene. But there's symbolism layered so thick here you could cut it with a knife. White represents purity, innocence, cleanliness of both body and soul. To appear before Victoria in white gloves is to present yourself as morally spotless, as concerned with spiritual hygiene as physical cleanliness. The Queen herself supposedly changes her white gloves up to 12 times per day. You've heard whispers from palace staff who've served at Buckingham, Windsor and Balmoral. They speak of wardrobes dedicated entirely to gloves, organised by weight, material, time of day, and occasion. Morning gloves differ from afternoon gloves, which differ from evening gloves, which differ from morning gloves. Victoria employs a mistress of the gloves, an actual titled position, whose job involves nothing but managing Her Majesty's glove wardrobe and ensuring the right pair appears at the right moment. Historians still argue whether Victoria's white glove obsession intensified after she survived multiple assassination attempts. Some scholars suggest she became fixated on the idea of contamination not just from germs, but from the metaphorical dirt of a hostile world. Others point out that her mother, the Duchess of Kent, enforced similarly strict glove protocols during Victoria's childhood, suggesting this is learned behaviour passed down through generations of German royalty, who believed proper dress reflected proper thinking. You're finally ushered into the main receiving room, and the sight nearly stops your breath. The space glitters with crystal chandeliers, but what catches your attention is the hands, hundreds of them, all properly gloved in pristine white. It's like a garden of white flowers, except these blooms are made of kidskin leather, silk and cotton, and they cost their wearers hours of preparation and anxiety. Near the windows, you spot an older countess you recognise from society pages. Her gloves look perfect from a distance, but as you draw closer, you notice they're slightly yellowed at the fingertips. She's positioned herself where the afternoon light won't illuminate this failing, probably hoping the Queen's inspection route won't bring her into direct scrutiny. It's a gamble. Victoria misses nothing. But even the Queen can't personally examine every guest at a reception of this size. A quirky detail catches your attention. Several gentlemen are wearing what appear to be glove suspenders, actual elastic bands that loop around the wrist and attach to the glove tops, ensuring they stay perfectly positioned and don't slip down to reveal even a centimetre of bare wrist. It looks uncomfortable and vaguely ridiculous. But you have to admire the commitment. These men are taking no chances with gravity or loose elastic. The white glove test extends beyond this initial inspection. You realise, throughout the event, ladies in waiting circulate like white-gloved sharks, observing, noting, occasionally approaching someone whose gloves have developed wrinkles or, heaven forbid, appear to be loosening. You watch one such lady-in-waiting pause beside a young debutante whose glove button has come undone. Words are exchanged too quietly for you to hear, but the girl's face flushes crimson. Within minutes, she's disappeared from the room, presumably to repair the damage or, if she lacks a spare pair, to leave entirely. The psychological weight of this constant scrutiny is exhausting. You find yourself checking your own gloves every few minutes, running your left hand over your right to ensure everything remains smooth, examining the backs of your hands for any hint of sagging fabric or loosening seams. Around you, everyone else is doing the same nervous inventory. It's like an entire room of people obsessed with their hands, yet simultaneously pretending those hands don't exist as independent body parts requiring comfort or natural movement. You remember reading about the scientific debates surrounding glove wearing in medical journals. Some physicians argue that constant glove wearing in social settings prevents the hands from developing natural resistance to common germs. Others counter that gloves protect delicate skin from environmental damage and from the countless opportunities for contamination in crowded spaces. The Queen, naturally, sides with the pro-glove faction, and her opinion carries more weight than entire universities full of doctors. A footman passes by carrying a silver tray laden with champagne glasses, and you watch carefully as guests accept drinks without removing their gloves. The condensation from the cold glass immediately dampens the white fabric, creating dark spots that spread like accusations. The guests who've taken drinks position themselves near fireplaces or in warmer corners of the room, hoping to dry their gloves before the moisture becomes too obvious. It's an exhausting calculation to drink and risk dampness, or to refuse refreshment and risk appearing rude. The absurdity would be funny if the consequences weren't so severe. You're watching an entire social class torture itself over hand coverings, yet everyone accepts this as normal, as necessary, as the price of civilization. And perhaps that's the real test the Queen administers, not whether your gloves are clean, but whether you're willing to endure discomfort, expense, and constant anxiety to maintain them. It's a test of your dedication to social order over personal ease. Your gloves are starting to feel like a prison now, beautiful and expensive, but a prison nonetheless. You're seated at an intimate dinner party at the home of the Duchess of Marlborough, 3 months after your successful presentation at court. The dining room glows with candlelight reflecting off silver and crystal, and you finally started to relax into the rhythms of high society. You've learned the glove rules, mastered the white glove test, and your hands have developed calluses in strange places from the constant constriction of kid leather. You think you understand this world now? Then the Duchess of Pemberton removes her gloves at the soup course. The sound of her tugging at the first finger seems impossibly loud in the sudden silence. You watch, frozen with your spoon halfway to your mouth, as she peels off first the right glove, then the left, revealing bare hands that look shockingly naked in this context. She places the gloves beside her plate with the casual confidence of someone who believes she's doing nothing wrong. then picks up her soup spoon with her bare fingers. The Countess of Ashford, seated across from you, goes pale. 2 seats down, Lady Hartwick's champagne glass trembles in her still-gloved hand. The Duchess of Marlborough, your hostess, sits at the head of the table with an expression that could freeze the Thames in August. You realise you're witnessing a scandal in real time, watching it unfold with the slow-motion clarity of a carriage accident you can't prevent. The Duchess of Pemberton, apparently oblivious to the horror she's causing, continues eating her soup with bare hands like some kind of savage from the colonies. Each movement of her naked fingers against the silver spoon feels obscene, transgressive, like watching someone undress in church. "My dear Duchess," Lady Marlborough finally says, her voice carrying the brittle sweetness of spun sugar about to shatter. "I see you've chosen to dispense with formality this evening." The Duchess of Pemberton looks up, genuine confusion in her eyes. "Forgive me, but surely at dinner one removes one's gloves. I spent last season in Paris, and the French ladies all dine with bare hands. The Empress Eugenie herself told me that gloves at table are terribly provincial." The word provincial lands like a slap. Around the table, you see the calculation happening behind every pair of eyes. The Duchess is claiming French sophistication, positioning herself as more worldly, more cosmopolitan than her English peers. She's suggesting that Victoria's court is behind the times, that the Queen herself is, and here you almost gasp at the implication provincial. "How absolutely fascinating," the Countess of Ashford says, her tone suggesting it's anything but. "And did the Empress also mention that here in England we follow English customs, or were you too busy being sophisticated to notice?" The barb hits its mark. The Duchess of Pemberton's bare hands still, and you watch the realisation dawn across her face. She's committed a catastrophic error. Not just a minor breach of etiquette, but a fundamental rejection of the entire system that keeps this world functioning. By removing her gloves, she declared herself above the rules that everyone else suffers under. She's suggested that her comfort, her French fashions, her personal preferences matter more than collective standards. The dinner continues, but it's like watching a play after the lead actress has forgotten her lines. Conversation limps along. You keep your gloves firmly on, your hands growing damper and more uncomfortable with each course, but you'd rather lose your hands entirely than risk association with this rebellion. Around the table, others make similar calculations. Gloves stay on through fish, fowl, and roast beef. Through asparagus that requires delicate fingerwork and cherries that stain. The Duchess of Pemberton, realising her mistake too late, attempts to put her gloves back on between courses. But this only compounds the offence. Now she's trying to cover contaminated hands that have touched food, touched utensils, touched her own face with gloves meant to maintain pristine separation from the world. It's like trying to unring a bell. Everyone sees, everyone judges, everyone mentally composes the letters they'll write tomorrow, spreading word of this disaster to every connected household in Britain. Historians still argue whether this particular incident actually occurred or whether it's an amalgamation of several similar scandals that swept through Victorian society in the 1870s and 1880s. Court records are, naturally, silent on such embarrassments. But whether this exact dinner happened or not, the consequences of bare-hand scandals were documented extensively in private correspondence and diary entries that survive today. You later hear that the Duchess of Pemberton received no invitations for the remainder of the season. Her daughter's debut was postponed indefinitely, though everyone knew that meant forever. The Duke quietly arranged for them to spend the following year at their Scottish estate, far from London society. By the time they returned, they'd been forgotten, relegated to that uncomfortable social tier of people who exist but don't matter, who attend events but sit in the back rows. who are acknowledged with the barest nods required by basic courtesy, all because she removed her gloves at dinner. The severity of the punishment seems wildly disproportionate to the crime, doesn't it? But you're beginning to understand that in Victoria's world, there are no small transgressions. Every rule exists to reinforce the larger structure of social hierarchy and control. When you remove your gloves without permission, you're not just making a fashion choice, you're declaring independence from the collective agreement that keeps the entire system intact. You're saying that your judgment supersedes the Queen's, that your comfort matters more than social cohesion. A quirky detail emerges in the scandal's aftermath. Several enterprising glove makers begin advertising dining gloves made from thinner leather, specifically designed for eating. These gloves supposedly allow for greater dexterity while maintaining propriety. The advertisements appear in ladies' magazines, featuring illustrations of elegant women eating elaborate meals without a hint of difficulty. Their thin gloves like second skins. You try a pair. They're marginally better than regular gloves, but you still manage to drop your fork twice and splash sauce on your bodice. The idea that anyone could navigate a 7-course Victorian dinner in gloves of any thickness without incident is laughable. But laughing isn't permitted when the alternative is social death. The Pemberton scandal spawns dozens of similar incidents as some bold or foolish souls attempt their own glove rebellions. A viscountess removes hers during a garden party on a sweltering July afternoon. A baroness's daughter develops a rash and appears at a ball with fingerless lace mittens as a compromise. A young widow insists that mourning gloves need not be worn indoors at family gatherings. Each rebellion is crushed. Each transgressor finds herself gradually excluded from the social calendar. Her invitations dwindling, her name whispered with pitying disdain. The message becomes crystal clear: you can question many things in Victorian England, but the sanctity of glove protocol is not among them. You attend a lecture series that winter where a lady doctor speaks about skin health and the dangers of excessive glove wearing. She presents photographs of hands damaged by constant constriction, of rashes and fungal infections that thrive in the warm, moist environment inside tight gloves. The audience listens politely. Then everyone goes home and puts their gloves back on, because medical science is interesting, but social survival is essential. By spring, the Duchess of Pemberton has become a cautionary tale, her name invoked whenever young ladies express frustration with glove rules. Do you want to end up like the Duchess of Pemberton? Mothers ask their daughters. And the daughters dutifully pull their gloves higher, button them tighter, and swallow their complaints. You spot her once, the following year, at a charity event where the organisers couldn't exclude titled guests without causing offence. She sits in the back, her gloves immaculate, her hands never once moving to adjust them despite what must be intense discomfort. She's learned her lesson. She'll never remove her gloves again in public if she lives to be 100. But the damage is permanent. Everyone remembers. In Victoria's court, your reputation is written in the actions of a single moment, and no amount of subsequent perfect behaviour can erase a spectacular failure. The Duchess's bare hands at that dinner table haunt her like a ghost, invisible but ever present. You look down at your own gloved hands and feel a mixture of gratitude and resentment. Grateful that you've never made such a catastrophic error. Resentful that you live in a world where such errors are possible, where your social existence can be destroyed by 10 bare fingers. You're attending your first major ball since becoming fully initiated into society, and you're watching a masterclass in silent communication unfold before your eyes. Lady Catherine Westwood stands near the refreshment table, and as Lord Ashford approaches, her gloved hand rises to smooth an invisible wrinkle from her opposite glove. The gesture takes perhaps 3 seconds. Lord Ashford stops mid-stride, his face falling, then turns and walks in the opposite direction without a word exchanged. You've just witnessed a rejection delivered through glove language, and you realise with dawning wonder and horror that an entire vocabulary exists in the movements of fabric-covered hands. This is no superstition or romantic fancy from penny novels, this is real, codified, and as precisely understood as spoken English among those who've mastered it. Your aunt leans close, her breath tickling your ear. She smoothed her left glove with her right hand, palm down. That means, I do not wish to speak with you. Had she smoothed with her palm up, it would have been an invitation to approach. The difference between a flat palm and an open palm determines whether a gentleman gains an audience or suffers humiliation. The complexity makes your head spin. You've spent months learning which fork to use and how to curtsy at the proper depth. But this is an entirely separate language operating beneath the surface of Victorian society, invisible to outsiders yet absolutely crucial for those navigating the marriage market and social advancement. You watch more carefully now, and the ballroom transforms into a stage where every gesture tells a story. A young woman drops her glove near a particular gentleman. He retrieves it, holds it perhaps 2 seconds too long before returning it. She accepts it with a palm facing up. Within 20 minutes, they're dancing. The glove drop, you learn later, signals interest. The extended hold confirms reciprocal attraction. The upturned palm grants permission to pursue. But drop your glove near the wrong man, or heaven forbid near multiple men in a single evening, and you're marked as desperate or improper. The glove drop must appear accidental, natural, utterly unintentional, even though everyone knows it's calculated down to the precise location where the glove lands. Ladies practice this move in their bedrooms, dropping gloves onto marked spots on the carpet until they can make deliberate actions look like genuine accidents. Miss Thornbury, a girl making her second season, demonstrates another signal. She's speaking with her chaperone, but her gloved fingers tap against her opposite forearm in a specific rhythm. 2 quick taps, pause. 3 slower taps. You follow her gaze and spot Mr. Harrison across the room. Within minutes, he's excusing himself from his conversation group and making his way toward her. The tapping pattern, you discover, means meet me in the garden in 10 minutes. The audacity and ingenuity of it staggers you. These women have created an entire underground communication system under the noses of chaperones, mothers, and society's watchdogs. They're conducting clandestine meetings, arranging secret correspondence, even negotiating marriage proposals without speaking a single word, using nothing but gloves and the movements of gloved hands. Your dance instructor, Mrs. Pemberton, no relation to the infamous Duchess, provides lessons in glove language alongside waltz steps. Twist your glove at the wrist while speaking to a gentleman, and you're declaring him boring. Draw your glove tighter while he speaks, and you're signalling you find him attractive but inappropriate. Perhaps he's poor or of lower rank. Remove one glove in his presence, and you might as well propose marriage yourself. So forward is such an action. The last instruction makes you laugh, until you see her deadly serious expression. Removing a glove near a man genuinely does signal the most intimate interest, almost scandalous in its implications. You're literally removing a barrier between yourself and him, revealing skin you've kept covered from the world. In an era where a glimpse of ankle can spark gossip, a deliberately bared hand in a man's presence carries weight equivalent to a modern marriage proposal. Historians still argue whether glove language was as universally understood as period sources suggest, or whether it varied by region and social circle. Some scholars point to etiquette manuals that codify these gestures in extensive detail, complete with illustrations. Others note that many of these manuals were published in America or France and may not reflect actual English practice. The debate continues, but enough primary sources, diaries, letters, novels reference gloves signalling that something substantial clearly existed. A quirky footnote in all this, several Victorian gentlemen published pocket guides to interpreting ladies' glove signals. Small books meant to fit in a coat pocket for quick reference during social events. Imagine standing at a ball watching a woman's gloved hands, then frantically consulting your guidebook like a tourist with a foreign language phrase book. The image is both endearing and absurd. These men desperately trying to decode whether they're being encouraged or dismissed based on how a woman holds her fan or adjusts her glove buttons. You practiced the signals in your mirror that night, your maid watching with barely concealed amusement. Smooth left glove with right hand, palm down rejection. Smooth left glove with right hand, palm up encouragement. Tap fingers against forearm in specific patterns, assignation requests. Draw glove tighter at the wrist, attracted but unavailable. Loosen glove at the fingers, bored and seeking rescue. Adjust glove button with thumb, listening carefully. Continue speaking. The permutations seem endless. Add fan language to glove language. And you're operating a complete non-verbal communication system that would impress modern cryptographers. A woman could conduct 3 different conversations simultaneously, one with her voice, one with her fan, and one with her gloves, each carrying completely different messages to different observers. You witness this multi-layered communication during a garden party the following week. Lady Harrington speaks pleasantly with Lord Ashford about the weather and roses, her voice carrying to all nearby guests. Her fan waves in a pattern that signals boredom to those who can read it. But her gloves tell yet another story. She's smoothing them repeatedly with upturned palms, adjusting buttons, drawing the fabric tighter at her wrists, to Mr. Brennan, who watches from across the lawn. Every gesture screams availability and interest. Within the hour, Lady Harrington and Mr. Brennan are strolling together. Lord Ashford has wandered off none the wiser, and you've watched a woman orchestrate an entire social manoeuvre without a verbal conversation ever betraying her intentions. The skill required is breathtaking. You wonder how many miscommunications occur, how many gentlemen approach thinking they've been invited, only to discover they've misread a gesture. How many ladies send signals they don't intend because they've scratched an itch or adjusted an uncomfortable seam. The potential for disaster is immense, and yet the system persists because it offers something vital in a society where young women have limited opportunities to express preference or agency. You cannot walk up to a man and announce your interest that would be shockingly forward. Grounds for social censure. But you can drop a glove near him. You can adjust your glove buttons while making eye contact. You can communicate desire, availability, interest, or rejection through movements so subtle that deniability remains intact. If confronted, you were merely adjusting uncomfortable gloves. You dropped your glove by accident. You smoothed a wrinkle because wrinkled gloves are improper. The gestures exist in a space between intentional and accidental, giving women a tool for navigation while maintaining the fiction that they're passive participants in their own courtships. Your aunt warns you that gentlemen have their own glove signals, though fewer and less elaborate. A man removing his glove to shake another man's hand in your presence signals he's establishing dominance, claiming territory. A man who bows to you while adjusting his glove cuffs is displaying his tailoring, his wealth, his worthiness. A man who accidentally brushes your gloved hand with his own is testing boundaries, seeing if you pull away or allow the contact. The complexity exhausts you. Every social interaction becomes a chess game where you're tracking verbal conversation, facial expressions, fan movements, glove gestures, body positioning, and the constantly shifting alliances and rivalries of everyone present. One wrong move, one signal misinterpreted or accidentally sent, and you could find yourself engaged to someone you can't stand or cut off from someone you desperately wish to know better. Yet women around you navigate this labyrinth with the ease of native speakers, their gloved hands conducting silent symphonies of meaning beneath the surface of polite conversation. You're determined to master this language, to wield your gloves as skillfully as any society matron, because in Victoria's world, your gloves aren't just fashion, they're your voice when you're expected to remain silent, your power when you're supposed to be powerless. You're standing outside an unmarked door on a narrow street in Mayfair, clutching the address your aunt pressed into your hand this morning. If you want gloves fit for presentation to the Queen, she told you. There's only one establishment that matters, Madame Celeste's Atelier. The waiting list is 6 months long, but I've arranged an introduction. The door opens before you can knock, and a woman in severe black silk examines you with eyes that seem to catalogue every detail of your person in 3 seconds. Miss Hartley, we've been expecting you. Madame Celeste will see you now. You're ushered through a dim corridor and into a workshop that takes your breath away. Sunlight streams through tall windows, illuminating tables covered with leather so soft it looks like liquid, spools of silk thread in every conceivable shade of white, and tools you don't recognize. 3 women sit at separate stations, their heads bent over work so delicate you can barely see what they're doing. The air smells of leather, beeswax, and something floral you can't quite identify. Madame Celeste herself emerges from a back room, a tiny woman with iron grey hair and hands gnarled by decades of detailed work. She doesn't smile. She doesn't offer pleasantries. She takes your right hand in both of hers and examines it with the intensity of a jeweller evaluating diamonds. Long fingers. Good. Narrow palm. Excellent. But you have a slight callus here. She touches a spot on your palm you weren't aware of from writing. Yes, and your 3rd finger curves slightly inward. This we must accommodate. Remove your gloves. You peel off your current gloves, suddenly embarrassed by their inadequacy. They're fine gloves, expensive gloves. Gloves that cost your father a small fortune. But under Madame Celeste's scrutiny, they look like crude approximations of what gloves should be. She produces a length of ribbon and begins measuring, not just the length of your hand and fingers, as you expected, but dozens of measurements you didn't know existed, the circumference of each finger at 3 different points, the exact distance from your wrist bone to the base of each finger, the angle at which your thumb extends from your palm, the depth of the webbing between your fingers. She records each measurement in a leather-bound book filled with similar notations for other clients, though you notice the names are encoded, protecting the privacy of ladies who've sat where you're sitting. You understand, Madame Celeste says, not looking up from her measurements, that gloves for court presentation are not merely accessories, they're architecture. They must fit so perfectly that they become invisible, so that when the Queen looks at you she sees a lady of quality, not a hand struggling inside an inadequate covering. The price she quotes makes you dizzy. Enough to feed a working-class family for 3 months, enough to buy a decent horse, for a single pair of gloves. But you nod, because refusing would reveal you as someone who doesn't belong in this world, someone who thinks money and fashion can be separated. The process takes 3 months, she continues. First, we create the pattern based on your measurements. Then we source the leather-kid leather from France, from goats raised in specific valleys where the grass gives the leather particular suppleness. The goats must be young, not yet matured, so the leather is fine enough. We reject 19 of every 20 hides we examine. You watch as she returns to her main workbench and spreads out a single glove in progress. The construction staggers you. What you assumed was a simple sleeve of leather is actually composed of dozens of pieces, separate panels for each finger, gussets between the fingers, a complex thumb construction that allows movement without wrinkling, reinforcement at stress points invisible from the outside. 37 pieces in each glove, Madame Celeste says, noting your amazement. Connected by stitches you cannot see. We stitch from inside the glove. Using thread, we make ourselves from silk so fine it takes 3 women a week to produce enough for 1 pair. The stitches must be invisible, evenly spaced, and strong enough to withstand the stress of wearing, but fine enough not to create ridges that would show through the leather. One of the seamstresses at a nearby table is working with a magnifying glass, making stitches so tiny you can barely see them even when you lean close. Her fingers move with mechanical precision, each stitch identical to the last. You learn she's been doing this work for 23 years and is considered still relatively inexperienced by the atelier's standards. Historians still argue whether the legendary glove-making establishments of Victorian London establishments like the one you're standing in were truly as meticulous as period accounts suggest, or whether the descriptions were exaggerated for marketing purposes. Some point out that gloves were mass-produced by the thousands for the growing middle class, suggesting standardized rather than bespoke construction. Others counter that court presentation gloves existed in a category entirely separate from ordinary fashion gloves, and that the elite paid extraordinary prices for extraordinary craftsmanship. A quirky detail catches your attention. In the corner of the workshop sits a life-sized mannequin handmade of wood, articulated at every joint. Madame Celeste notices your interest and explains, "When we finish constructing your gloves, we fit them on a mannequin hand carved to your exact specifications. We stretch them gently, repeatedly, for 3 weeks, teaching the leather to hold your hand's shape. When you first wear them, they will feel as though they've been worn 100 times, as though they grew from your hands rather than being imposed upon them." The attention to detail borders on obsessive, but you're beginning to understand that in Victoria's world, obsession over detail is the price of acceptance. There's no room for good enough when you're presenting yourself before the Queen. Every imperfection is a statement about your character, your family, your worthiness to occupy space in the highest circles of society. Madame Celeste shows you samples of closures buttons carved from a mother-of-pearl, each one unique, each requiring hand-drilling of holes so tiny a standard needle won't pass through. We offer 3 button styles: the classic, which is what the Queen herself prefers, the French, which is slightly more decorative but still acceptable for court, and the discreet, which uses hidden hooks rather than visible buttons. I recommend the classic for your first pair. Later, when you're established, you can experiment. You select the classic, not because you have strong feelings about button styles, but because deviating from the Queen's preference in any detail seems unnecessarily risky. The leather samples come next, dozens of them, each labelled with cryptic notations. This is Chevette glace kid from France, treated with alum and egg white to give it sheen without stiffness. This is suede, from the underside of the hide, softer but less formal. This is peccary, from South America, very durable but perhaps too textured for court. For you, I recommend this." She holds up a piece of white leather so fine it's nearly translucent. "Supreme glacé kid, French, from the Dordogne region. It'll cost an additional 20%, but it is perfection." You agree to the Supreme Glacé kid, your mental tally of the final cost climbing to heights that make your conscience ache even as your vanity swells. The colour discussion takes another hour. You assumed white was simply white. But Madame Celeste disabuses you of this notion immediately. She presents you with a card showing 17 different shades of white, each with a poetic name: moonlight white, pearl white, cream white, ivory white, frost white, snow white, lily white. Each shade carries subtle differences invisible to your untrained eye but apparently crucial for matching with your complexion, your gown, and the lighting conditions of the venue where you'll wear them. The Queen's advisors prefer lily white for presentations during the day and pearl white for evening functions, Madame Celeste informs you. But your complexion has warm undertones, so I recommend cream white, which will prevent you from looking washed out under candlelight. You defer to her expertise, suspecting that she knows more about the Queen's colour preferences than most of Victoria's actual advisors. The final discussion involves the moment, the precise technique for pulling on the finished gloves. Madame Celeste demonstrates with a sample pair, showing you how to ease your fingers in one at a time, never forcing, always coaxing the leather to expand around your hand. Force creates stress points that will eventually tear. Patience creates perfection. You should spend no less than 5 minutes donning each glove properly. 5 minutes per glove, 10 minutes total, just to put on gloves. The absurdity wars with practicality in your mind, but you watch carefully, memorizing each step of the process as you prepare to leave, having placed your order and arranged for fittings at various stages of construction. Madame Celeste touches your arm. "Remember," she says quietly, "the gloves I create are tools. They will help you navigate society, present yourself properly, meet the Queen's standards, but they are only as effective as the woman wearing them. A perfect glove on an imperfect lady is still an imperfection." You walk back out into the London afternoon, your bare hands feeling strangely exposed after an hour discussing their covering. 3 months until your bespoke gloves are ready. 3 months of continued practice with your merely expensive gloves, preparing for the day when you'll wear gloves that cost more than most people's quarterly income. And worth every penny, because in Victoria's world, your gloves are your credentials, your armour, and your identity all stitched into 37 pieces of supreme glacé kid leather from the Dordogne region of France. You're standing in an antechamber at Buckingham Palace, and your stomach feels like it's attempting to escape through your throat. Today is your presentation ceremony, the moment when you will officially enter society by curtsying before Queen Victoria while wearing the gloves that arrived from Madame Celeste's atelier yesterday. The gloves fit like a whispered prayer, so perfect you sometimes forget you're wearing them, except you can never forget because your entire future depends on the next 30 minutes going flawlessly. Around you, 17 other young women wait in various states of barely controlled panic. Miss Ashford is breathing so rapidly you fear she'll faint before her name is called. Lady Caroline Pemberton, daughter of the infamous Duchess, looks as though she's facing execution rather than presentation, the weight of her mother's scandal visible in every tense line of her body. Miss Thornbury repeatedly smooths her already perfect skirt, her gloved hands leaving no mark on the silk but unable to stop their nervous movement. Your chaperone, Aunt Margaret, adjusts your train for the 40th time, though nothing has shifted since the last adjustment. "Remember," she whispers, her breath hot against your ear, "the curtsy must be deep but not theatrical. Your head bows, but your eyes remain on the Queen until the moment you dip lowest. Then you may close them briefly. Your gloved hands remain at your sides, never touching your dress, never grasping for balance. And for heaven's sake, absolutely do not let your fingers twitch or fidget. The glove anxiety is its own special torment. You've worn gloves every day for months, mastered the white glove test, learned glove language, spent a fortune on Madame Celeste's craftsmanship. But this moment is different. This is the moment when the Queen herself will see your gloved hands, when any imperfection will be noted and remembered. You've heard stories of presentations ruined by wrinkled gloves, by gloves that had developed a stain during the carriage ride to the palace, by gloves that fit imperfectly and created ungainly bunching at the wrists. Your gloves, mercifully, remain perfect. The supreme glace kid leather in cream white gleams softly in the antechamber's light. The mother-of-pearl buttons march up your forearms in precise alignment. The stitching is invisible. The fit is so exact that you can feel your pulse through the leather, but no one else would detect the slightest excess fabric or strain. A lady-in-waiting enters, her face betraying nothing. "Miss Hartley, you're next." Your legs nearly refuse to move, but years of deportment training override panic. You glide forward, never walk. Always glide through the doorway and into the throne room where your entire social future will be determined in less time than it takes to brew tea. The space overwhelms your senses. Gold leaf covers seemingly every surface. Massive paintings of Victoria's ancestors stare down at you from the walls. Windows taller than houses let in afternoon light that makes the whole room glow like the inside of a jewel box. And there, seated on a throne that somehow manages to be both magnificent and oddly domestic, is Queen Victoria herself. She's smaller than you expected, her famous black mourning dress making her appear almost fragile. But her eyes, those eyes, miss nothing. They track your approach with the intensity of a bird of prey. You can feel her gaze sweep over you, cataloguing every detail, every potential flaw, every hint of imperfection. You begin your approach, counting steps in your head the way you practiced 1,000 times. Your train flows behind you, held by a young page who knows his job is to ensure the fabric lies perfectly. Your posture is so rigidly correct, it's almost painful. Your gloved hands rest naturally at your sides, fingers gently curved as though holding invisible flowers, the position Madame Celeste insisted was most elegant. 3 steps from the throne, you stop. This is the moment. Everything you've prepared for, everything your family has invested in your debut, everything your future depends upon. It all comes down to the next 10 seconds. You curtsy, deep, controlled, perfectly balanced. Your head bows, your eyes remain on the Queen until the lowest point. Your back stays straight despite the extreme angle. Your gloved hands never waver from their position. You hold the curtsy for the prescribed 3 seconds, not 2, not 4, exactly 3, then rise with the same controlled grace. Queen Victoria's eyes lock on yours. For a breathless moment, you think you've failed somehow, that she's seen some flaw invisible to everyone else. Then she nods. Once, barely perceptible. But it's enough. You've passed. You're officially presented. You're in. The lady-in-waiting materializes at your elbow, guiding you backward. Never turn your back on the Queen until you're at a safe distance, then directing you to the side of the room where other successfully presented young women stand in a cluster that radiates relief like heat from a fire. Miss Thornbury goes next. Her curtsy is textbook perfect, her gloves immaculate, her composure admirable. She receives the same minimal nod. Miss Ashford follows, managing not to faint, and also passes. Lady Caroline Pemberton's turn comes, and you can see the extra scrutiny the Queen applies, remembering her mother's scandal, but Caroline's gloves are flawless, her curtsy impeccable, and eventually, after a pause that stretches cruelly long, Victoria nods her approval. The daughter will not pay for the mother's sins, at least not today. Then disaster strikes. Miss Emily Worthington, who entered the antechamber with gloves that looked perfect, reaches the presentation point and something goes catastrophically wrong. As she begins her curtsy, one of her glove buttons snags on the elaborate beadings of her gown. She feels it catch and instinctively jerks her hand to free it. The button tears loose. leaving a small gap in the row of closures marching up her forearm. It's a tiny flaw. Most people wouldn't notice, but Victoria notices everything. The Queen's expression doesn't change, but something shifts in her eyes. The nod doesn't come. Instead, Victoria gestures almost imperceptibly to a lady-in-waiting, who hurries forward and whispers something to Miss Worthington. The girl goes white. She's dismissed. Her presentation doesn't count. She'll have to apply again next season, if she's even permitted to do so, and the story of her torn glove button will follow her like a ghost. You watch Miss Worthington retreat from the throne room, her shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs, and you feel simultaneously grateful for your own success and horrified by the system that destroys young women over such minutiae. A broken button. That's all it took to ruin a months of preparation, thousands of pounds of expense, and years of anticipation. Historians still argue whether Victoria's famous attention to glove detail was truly about maintaining standards, or whether it was a form of control over the young women entering her court. Some suggest the Queen, having ascended the throne at 18 and married at 20, resented the youth and potential of the debutantes parading before her, and used glove protocol as a weapon to assert dominance. Others counter that Victoria genuinely believed proper dress reflected proper character, and that her scrutiny served a protective function, ensuring only seriously prepared young women entered society's highest ranks. A quirky detail you learn later. Queen Victoria kept a private book recording notable glove failures at presentations. Not names, she wasn't cruel, but descriptions of the errors. Glove button hanging by thread. Visible darning at thumb joint. Gloves too large. Wrinkled at wrist. The book supposedly ran to over 300 pages by the time of her death. Historians debate whether this book actually existed or whether it's apocryphal, but multiple sources reference it in memoirs and letters. After the final presentation, the successful debutantes are ushered into a reception room where you're permitted finally to relax slightly. Champagne appears on silver trays, delicate pastries that you're too nervous to eat are offered, and everyone, absolutely everyone, immediately examines their gloves for any damage sustained during the ordeal. Your gloves remain perfect, but you notice Miss Thornbury's left glove has developed a tiny crease at the wrist from how she held her hands during her curtsy. Lady Caroline's right glove shows a faint mark where she briefly touched a doorframe to steady herself. These minor imperfections would have been disastrous during the presentation itself, but now they're badges of honour, proof that you've survived the trial. An older countess approaches, her own gloves so pristine they might have been donned 30 seconds ago, despite her being at the palace all afternoon. Well done, my dears. You've crossed the threshold. Though I should warn you, the presentation is merely the beginning. Now you must maintain these standards every single day, at every event, for the rest of your social careers. The glove scrutiny never ends. Welcome to the exhaustion of excellence. She smiles as she says it, but the warning is genuine. You've proven you can meet the Queen's standards once, under optimal conditions with months of preparation. Now you must meet them constantly, casually, as though perfection requires no effort at all. You look down at your gloved hands, these supreme glass kid marvels from Madame Celeste that cost more than some people earn in half a year. They're beautiful, they're perfect, and they're the most uncomfortable things you've ever worn, despite their custom fit and masterful construction. But you'll keep wearing them, you'll keep maintaining them, you'll keep submitting to the white glove tests and the scrutiny and the discomfort, because you've just been granted access to a world that most people only glimpse from the outside. And the price of admission is measured in buttons, stitches, and unwavering attention to the covering of your hands. You're watching your brother prepare for his first evening at his gentleman's club, and the ritual surrounding his gloves makes your own glove anxieties seem almost simple by comparison. Thomas stands before his valet, who presents 3 different pairs of gloves on a silver tray as though offering crown jewels. Each pair looks identical to your untrained eye, but apparently they're as different as a ball gown and a riding habit. The tan doeskin for daytime calls, the valet explains, his tone suggesting he's reviewing information Thomas should have memorised months ago. The grey suede for afternoon social events, the white kid for evening functions. Never, under any circumstances, confuse them. The consequences would be unfortunate. Thomas, who can recite Latin poetry and discuss philosophy for hours, looks genuinely intimidated by 3 pairs of gloves. You realise with some satisfaction that men's glove protocol might actually be more complex than women's, though men would never admit it. The valet continues his lecture. When you arrive at the club, you remove your outdoor gloves in the vestibule never before, never after. You hand them to the attendant with your hat and coat, inside. You do not wear gloves except in the dining room, where you must don your evening gloves before touching any food or drink. When greeting another member, you remove your right glove for handshakes, but only if the other gentleman removes his first. To remove your glove preemptively suggests you expect the handshake, which implies presumption of equality that may not exist. Your head spins trying to track these rules. Thomas looks equally overwhelmed. And the 3-pair rule, the valet prompts. Thomas recites like a schoolboy, a gentleman maintains 3 pairs of gloves in rotation at all times. 1 pair on his hands, 1 pair in his pocket as backup, and 1 pair being cleaned. Appearing in public with only a single pair of gloves suggests poverty or poor planning, both equally damning. The expense of this system staggers you. 3 pairs of gloves, constantly in rotation, being replaced every few months as they wear out. And that's just the basic requirement. Thomas actually owns 17 pairs of gloves for different occasions, seasons, and social contexts. 17 pairs, each requiring careful maintenance, proper storage, and precise deployment in the correct circumstances. You accompany your father to his tailor later that week and witness another dimension of masculine glove anxiety. The tailor measures your father's hands with the same obsessive detail Madame Celeste applied to yours, but then adds something unexpected. And how would Sir like his gloves cut? The English cut provides more room in the fingers for comfort. The French cut fits tighter for elegance. The American cut well. We don't speak of the American cut in polite company. The tailor's disdain for American glove construction makes you smile. Apparently men's glove nationalism runs deep, with English, French, and Italian styles competing for supremacy. Each country claims its cutting method produces superior gloves, and wearing the wrong national style can mark you as provincial, or worse, as someone trying to appear more cosmopolitan than you actually are. Your father selects the English cut, naturally, but adds, "Make sure the thumb gusset allows for my grip pressure when holding a walking stick. Last pair you made me constrain my thumb joint, and I looked like I was strangling the handle." These details matter in men's worlds just as much as in yours. You realise, maybe more, because men at least pretend their rules are based on practicality and function rather than mere fashion. A man's glove must allow him to shake hands firmly, hold a cigar properly, grip a glass without fumbling, and maintain his walking stick with the correct angle and pressure. Women's gloves just need to look perfect and signal correctly. Men's gloves must perform. Historians still argue whether the elaborate masculine glove protocols of Victorian England served any practical purpose, or whether they were pure social theatre designed to separate gentlemen from tradesmen. Some scholars point to the genuine functional requirements gloves did protect hands during outdoor activities and prevent calluses that would mark a man as someone who performed manual labour. Others note that many of the rules seem specifically designed to be difficult to follow without leisure time and disposable income, effectively creating a barrier to entry that kept the working class from infiltrating gentlemen's spaces. A quirky detail emerges when you attend a lecture on men's fashion history, apparently. Dueling gloves were an actual category of men's gloves in the early Victorian period. These gloves were constructed with reinforced palms and fingers to protect hands during sword duels while maintaining enough flexibility for weapon control. By the 1870s, when dueling had been largely abandoned, men still referenced dueling glove quality as the gold standard for any gloves construction, even though they'd never used them for actual combat. You watch Thomas prepare for various social obligations over the following weeks, and the glove choreography becomes almost comical in its precision. Before a morning call, he dons his tan doeskin gloves while still in the house, removes them in the carriage to prevent wear, puts them back on before exiting the carriage, removes the right glove to hand his card to the butler, replaces it after entry, removes both gloves in the receiving room, carries them draped over his left forearm during conversation, then reverses the entire process when departing. The mental energy required to track all this seems exhausting. Yet Thomas and every other gentleman in London perform these rituals without apparent thought, the same way you've learned to navigate women's glove protocols. It's become automatic, internalized, as natural as breathing despite being completely artificial. Your uncle visiting from his country estate at Utrecht provides an alternative perspective over dinner one evening. All this glove nonsense, he grumbles, struggling to cut his meat while wearing the required evening gloves. In my day, a man wore gloves outside to keep his hands warm and removed them inside to use his hands properly. Now we're putting on and taking off gloves like a music hall costume change. It's ridiculous. Your aunt's warning glance silences him, but you've glimpsed the generational divide. Older men remember a simpler time when gloves were functional items rather than social signalling devices. Younger men like Thomas have never known anything but the current Byzantine system. And men your father's age straddle both worlds, remembering the old ways while enforcing the new standards on their sons. The sports gloves category introduces yet another layer of complexity. Thomas owns specific gloves for riding, driving, shooting, cricket, tennis, and rowing. Each sport requires different glove construction based on the grip required and the potential for damage. His riding gloves have reinforced range points. His shooting gloves feature padded trigger fingers. His cricket gloves include protective panels across the knuckles. But here's where it gets truly absurd. He's not permitted to wear his sport-specific gloves anywhere except during the actual sport. Appearing at a club in riding gloves when you haven't just dismounted, a horse suggests you're trying too hard to appear athletic. Wearing shooting gloves to a dinner party would be like arriving in your dressing gown technically clothing, but so inappropriate as to be insulting. The glove cleaning industry that supports all this male glove anxiety is substantial. Thomas employs a specialist who does nothing but maintain his glove collection cleaning, conditioning the leather, replacing buttons, ensuring each pair is ready for deployment at a moment's notice. This specialist, Mr. Hodges, takes his work as seriously as any physician takes medicine. Gloves reveal character. Mr. Hodges intones while examining a pair of Thomas's evening gloves for wear. A man who maintains his gloves maintains his standards. A man with shoddy gloves has a shoddy mind. The philosophy seems extreme, but you notice Thomas nodding along, fully indoctrinated into this worldview. You attend a garden party where you watch masculine glove protocol in action across multiple social scenarios. Men arriving remove their outdoor gloves and hand them to servants. Men engaged in lawn games don specific sporting gloves brought by their valets. Men seated for refreshments put on clean social gloves that match their waistcoats. The constant glove changes create a background rhythm to the event. A choreography of hands being covered and uncovered according to invisible rules that govern every moment. One young man commits a spectacular error. He shakes hands with an older gentleman while still wearing his sporting gloves, fresh from a cricket match. The older gentleman's face freezes. The handshake happens because refusing would cause an even greater scandal. But the young man has marked himself as poorly trained, someone who doesn't know the rules. You watch as other guests subtly distance themselves from him throughout the remainder of the party. By evening, he's standing alone near the refreshment table, his sporting gloves still on his hands like evidence of a crime he doesn't fully understand he's committed. Thomas explains the offence during your carriage ride home. Sporting gloves are for sport only. They're constructed differently, often with rough leather for grip. To shake hands with them is to imply the other person is part of your sporting activity. Reducing them to the status of teammate or opponent rather than social equal is deeply insulting, suggesting the other gentleman isn't worthy of proper social gloves. The reasoning seems like something someone invented to justify an arbitrary rule, but everyone treats it as gospel truth. This is the world you both inhabit now, a world where the covering on your hands carries more meaning than the words from your mouth, where leather and stitching communicate status more clearly than credentials or character. Your father's generation mastered these rules to secure their positions. Your generation must maintain them to keep your places, and you suspect future generations will look back at all of you and wonder how seemingly intelligent people devoted so much energy to something as fundamentally absurd as glove protocol. But for now, you watch Thomas carefully pack his glove case for his upcoming trip to Scotland, 17 pairs, each in protective cloth bags, each labelled for its specific purpose. He handles them with the reverence some men reserve for religious texts or love letters, because in Victoria's world, a man's gloves are his armour, his credentials, and his identity, all stitched together in hide from animals he'll never see, constructed by artisans he'll never meet, governed by rules no one can quite explain but everyone must follow. You're seated in the drawing room when the butler announces an unexpected visitor, the Comte de Beaumont representing the French embassy. Your mother's face goes pale, and you understand immediately this is a test of international glove diplomacy, and your family's reputation hangs on navigating it correctly. The Comte enters with the fluid grace of French aristocracy. His gloves a shade of pearl grey, so elegant they make every English glove you've ever seen look provincial. He's wearing them indoors, which would be scandalous for an Englishman. But the rules are different for foreign diplomats, and you're suddenly aware that you're operating in a space where multiple conflicting glove protocols must somehow coexist. Your father rises to greet him, and you watch the intricate dance begin. Does father remove his gloves for the handshake, honouring English custom, or keep them on? Acknowledging French practice, he compromises by removing only his right glove, a gesture that signals respect for both traditions while fully satisfying neither. The Comte accepts this with a slight smile that suggests he's witnessed this English awkwardness countless times before. Madam, mademoiselle, the Comte says, bowing to your mother and then to you, in the French manner. He takes your mother's gloved hand and brings it halfway towards his lips, without actually touching it, a gesture that would be scandalously familiar by English standards, but is apparently standard French greeting protocol. Your mother, prepared for this by her own mother's warnings about continental manners, accepts the gesture with a gracious nod. When he turns to you, you extend your hand exactly as you saw your mother do, palm down, fingers relaxed, the Comte performs the same near kiss, and you feel simultaneously sophisticated and slightly scandalous. If the Queen could see this, would she approve of your adaptation to foreign custom, or would she consider it a betrayal of English propriety? The Comte settles into the chair your father indicates. And here's where the true complications begin. In France, you've heard, ladies sometimes remove their gloves during afternoon calls, especially in summer. In England, you absolutely do not, unless specifically invited by the hostess. But what happens when a French gentleman visits an English home? Do you follow English rules in English space? Or adjust to the visitor's expectations? Your mother, bless her diplomatic instincts, finds a middle path. Comte, given the warmth of the afternoon, please feel welcome to remove your gloves if you'd be more comfortable. She's offering him permission while maintaining the English framework that gloves require permission to remove. "You are most gracious, madam," he replies. "But I would not wish to impose my continental habits upon your lovely English home. I shall follow your excellent customs." He keeps his gloves on, but you notice they're constructed differently from English gloves, softer leather, more flexible, as though the French have solved some equation of elegance and comfort that English glove makers haven't yet discovered. The conversation that follows is ostensibly about trade relations and cultural exchange. But underneath flows a constant current of glove awareness. The Comte gestures with his hands while speaking, the French way, his gloved fingers describing shapes in the air. Your father keeps his hands mostly still, the English way, letting his words carry meaning without gestural embellishment. These different approaches to gloved communication create a subtle tension, each style silently asserting its own superiority. Tea arrives, and now you face the multi-layered challenge of serving refreshment under glove protocol complicated by international custom. In England, you've learned, ladies may remove gloves for tea in the privacy of family but must keep them on when guests are present unless given explicit permission. But this particular guest is diplomatic representation from France, which means offending him could theoretically strain relations between nations. Your mother pours tea while wearing her gloves, demonstrating proper English hostess behaviour. The Comte accepts his cup with gloved hands, French style. Your father takes his tea gloved, English style. You're all essentially performing your national identities through hand coverings and hot beverages, and the absurdity would be hilarious if the stakes weren't genuinely significant. "I understand," the Comte says conversationally while sipping his tea. "That English court presentation requires extraordinary attention to glove quality. In France, we are perhaps more flexible in such matters. The Empress values elegance over rigid uniformity." He's drawing a distinction, suggesting French superiority in taste, while English superiority lies only in inflexible rules. Your father navigates this potential insult smoothly. Each nation has its own standards of excellence. Comte, I'm sure French glove makers are as skilled as our own, though I confess I've developed rather patriotic attachments to English craftsmanship. A compliment wrapped around a declaration of loyalty, neither accepting nor rejecting the Comte's implied criticism. Historians still argue whether these Victorian-era glove negotiations between English and continental customs genuinely affected diplomatic relations, or whether they were mere social performance without real political weight. Some point to documented instances where ambassadors reported glove protocol failures to their home governments, suggesting the matter carried genuine importance. Others contend that diplomats exaggerated such incidents to make their job seem more challenging than they actually were. A quirky detail you learned from your mother's collection of etiquette manuals, the British Foreign Office actually published a guide for diplomats titled International Glove Protocols and Their Navigation, running to over 200 pages. The guide covered glove customs in every major European nation. the Ottoman Empire, and several Asian countries where British interests required diplomatic presence. Apparently more than one trade negotiation had foundered because an English diplomat committed a glove faux pas that offended his foreign counterpart. The Comte mentions that he'll be attending a ball at the Russian embassy next week, and the conversation shifts to the horror story every English socialite knows: Russian glove protocol is even stricter than English, but different in crucial ways that make it almost impossible for foreigners to navigate successfully. Russian ladies are expected to keep gloves on at all times, except during the actual dinner service, and even then only after the hostess has given a specific signal by removing her own gloves. Mistiming this moment by even 30 seconds can cause offence. "I am curious," the Comte says, his eyes twinkling with what might be mischief, "about English attitudes toward Italian glove customs. I understand that in Italy, ladies sometimes remove a single glove during conversation to gesture more freely. This would be considered... What is your delightful English word?" Scandalous. Your mother's diplomatic skills are truly being tested now. "I believe," she says carefully, "that what is elegant in Rome might be unexpected in London, just as what is proper in London might seem stiff in Rome. The joy of international relations is learning to appreciate these differences without necessarily adopting them wholesale." Well played. Mother. She's acknowledged the custom without condemning it, and defended English practice without attacking Italian, all while keeping her own gloves perfectly in place as demonstration of her loyalty to local standards. The Comte changes tactics, turning to you, and you, mademoiselle. Do you find English glove customs restrictive, or do they feel natural to you, having grown up within them? He's probing to see if the younger generation is more flexible, more willing to criticize their own traditions. You've been preparing for exactly this kind of question since your presentation. I find them informative. Comte, just as a painter works within the constraints of canvas and frame to create art, we work within our social structures to express individuality. The rules themselves matter less than what we do within them. Your father's approving nod tells you that you've answered correctly, defending English custom, while sounding sophisticated rather than defensive. The Comte acknowledges your response with an elegant inclination of his head, his grey gloves catching the afternoon light in a way that makes them shimmer like silk. The visit concludes with another round of hand gestures that navigate the space between English and French custom. The Comte departs, leaving behind an atmosphere of relieved tension. Your family has successfully managed an international glove diplomacy encounter without causing an incident that would ripple through embassy drawing rooms. Well done, everyone, your father says once the Comte's carriage has departed, though I must say, French gloves do have a certain elegance we might consider adopting, within reason, of course. Wouldn't want to appear disloyal. Your mother removes her gloves now that the visitor has left, and you see red marks on her wrists where the fabric has pressed too tightly during the strain of maintaining diplomatic composure. The next time a French diplomat visits, she says ruefully, I'm claiming illness. Let someone else navigate those treacherous waters. But you know she won't. None of you will. Because in Victoria's world, particularly in London's diplomatic circles, glove protocol isn't just about fashion or even about social standing, it's about representing your nation, demonstrating that English customs can hold their own against continental sophistication, proving that you can maintain your standards even while respecting others. You attend a lecture the following week on cultural exchange in the modern age, where a speaker discusses how international trade has created new challenges for traditional customs. When someone asks about glove protocol in cross-cultural contexts, the speaker responds seriously. Gloves have become a language that must be translated across borders. What we wear on our hands communicates our respect, our flexibility, our loyalty, and our sophistication. Failure to master this language can undermine years of careful diplomatic work. The statement sounds melodramatic, but you remember the Comte's visit and recognize the truth in it. Your gloves weren't just gloves during that encounter, they were flags, declarations, statements of cultural allegiance and international awareness, all wrapped into hand coverings that cost a fortune to maintain and even more psychic energy to deploy correctly. You're living through an era when the covering on your hands matters more than most people's entire wardrobes, when leather and thread carry diplomatic weight, when a simple social call from a French count becomes an international incident waiting to happen unless everyone performs their glove choreography flawlessly. And somewhere in France, you imagine, a young woman is probably attending a similar lecture, learning how to navigate the peculiarities of English glove custom should she ever visit London. She's probably finding English rules just as baffling and arbitrary as you find French flexibility. And you're both trapped in your respective glove prisons, representing your nations one hand covering at a time. You're reading the morning newspaper when a headline catches your eye: suffragettes storm Parliament bare-handed. The accompanying illustration shows women with uncovered hands raised in defiance, and you feel a jolt of recognition. Someone has weaponized the very glove rules you've spent years mastering, turning them into instruments of protest. The article describes how a group of women demanding voting rights appeared at Parliament yesterday without gloves, their bare hands deliberately displayed as they attempted to deliver a petition. Police turned them away, citing improper dress for official government business. The suffragettes declared this exactly their point: if women's hands aren't considered proper enough to be seen in Parliament, why should women's votes be considered proper enough to count in elections? The logic is devastating in its simplicity, and you find yourself both scandalized and secretly impressed. These women have identified the absurdity at the heart of glove protocol and are using it as a weapon against the very system that created it. Your mother enters the drawing room, sees what you're reading, and makes a small sound of distress. Those dreadful women, appearing in public without gloves, have they no shame, no sense of propriety? But you're thinking about the layers of meaning in that bare-handed protest. Every woman in Britain knows the rules about gloves. Every woman has suffered through the discomfort, the expense, the constant scrutiny. By deliberately breaking those rules in a political context, the suffragettes are connecting women's social constraints to their political disenfranchisement. They're saying the same society that won't let us show our hands in public won't let us show our will at the ballot box. You don't say this aloud. Your family is decidedly not sympathetic to the suffragette cause, but you clip the article and hide it in your private journal, recognizing something significant is happening. Over the following months, the glove rebellion escalates. You hear stories that filter through society's gossip networks with a mixture of horror and fascination. At a society wedding, 3 guests appeared wearing fingerless gloves, exposing their actual fingers while technically maintaining glove coverage. The hostess nearly fainted. The women claimed they were honouring both tradition and modernity, but everyone understood it as a political statement. A famous actress performs an entire play wearing black gloves when the script calls for white, then delivers a speech afterward about how women are forced to cover their true selves under layers of false propriety. The theatre management bans her from future performances. She responds by staging her next play in a rented hall, performing in no gloves at all, and selling out every show to audiences curious to see such transgression. Historians still argue whether the glove protests of the suffragette movement genuinely advanced their political cause, or whether they merely alienated potential supporters who saw glove rebellion as proof that women seeking the vote were dangerous radicals. Some scholars point to later suffragette writings that specifically credit glove protests with raising awareness about the connections between social and political constraints. Others note that mainstream newspapers consistently portrayed barehanded protesters as unwomanly and unhinged, suggesting the strategy backfired. A quirky development, several manufacturers begin producing reform gloves, with built-in features meant to address suffragette complaints while maintaining propriety. These gloves feature easier closures, more breathable fabrics, and looser fits. They're marketed as modern woman's gloves, comfortable yet correct, but the suffragettes reject them entirely, pointing out that making oppression more comfortable doesn't eliminate oppression. You attend a charity luncheon where the speaker is a moderate reformer, someone who believes in gradual change rather than radical protest. She wears gloves, proper white ones, but during her speech she makes a point of removing them slowly, deliberately. While discussing women's need for greater autonomy, it's a calculated gesture, not full rebellion, but not full compliance either. Half the audience applauds, half sits in shocked silence. You find yourself among the applauders before you quite realise you've made that choice. Your friend Margaret pulls you aside afterward. Did you clap for that woman? Do you know what people say? I clapped for a well-reasoned speech about educational opportunities for women. You reply carefully. Surely that's not controversial. But Margaret's worried expression tells you that everything is controversial now. The glove question has become politicised, infected with meanings beyond mere etiquette. Every choice about when and how you wear your gloves carries potential political interpretation. Are you properly gloved because you're traditionally minded, or because you're choosing your battles carefully? Are you loosening your gloves at the wrist because they're uncomfortable, or because you're signalling subtle support for reform? The ambiguity is exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. You're discovering that the rules you've mastered can be tools for more than just social advancement. They can be questioned. They can be resisted. They can be deliberately broken for strategic purposes. You witness a remarkable incident at a garden party that summer. Lady Ashford, an elderly duchess known for her rigid adherence to every social rule, appears with her gloves on as expected. But when a young suffragette sympathiser makes a comment about hidebound traditions stifling women's potential, Lady Ashford does something shocking. She removes her gloves, sets them aside, and says, "I have worn gloves at social functions for 63 years. I've never questioned whether this was necessary, only whether my gloves were sufficiently pristine." Perhaps the young people have a point about examining our assumptions. The garden party goes silent. Here is a woman who represents everything traditional, everything the suffragettes are supposedly rebelling against. And she's just sided with the rebels. Or has she? Because she removed her gloves in the proper context, a private garden party where she, as the highest-ranking lady present, has the authority to set standards. She's simultaneously acknowledging the suffragettes' point and demonstrating that change can happen within existing structures if those with power choose to allow it. The political sophistication of the moment takes your breath away. Lady Ashford has just performed a masterclass in navigating between tradition and reform, showing that the two aren't necessarily opposites, but not everyone appreciates such nuance. A group calling themselves the Gloved Ladies Society forms in response to the suffragette protests. They appear at public events wearing elaborate gloves and carrying signs declaring proper women preserve propriety and gloves guard virtue. They position themselves as defenders of civilization against the chaos of bare-handed radicalism. The spectacle is almost comical, two groups of women fighting over hand coverings, as though leather and thread somehow determine the fate of the nation. Except it's not really about gloves, and everyone knows it. It's about control. It's about who gets to decide what's proper. It's about whether women will continue accepting rules made by others or demand participation in rule-making themselves. You find yourself in conversations where you must carefully navigate your own position. At your aunt's house, where traditional views dominate, you express mild disapproval of those radical women while keeping your gloves firmly on. At your cousin's salon, where younger, more progressive women gather, you allow yourself to criticize unnecessarily restrictive customs and occasionally loosen your gloves at the wrist when making a point about female autonomy. You're becoming bilingual in glove language, the traditional language you learned from your mother and deportment instructors. And this newer political language where every adjustment carries potential meaning about your views on women's rights. It's mentally exhausting, tracking not just whether your gloves are proper, but what message your gloves are sending about your political sympathies. A suffragette leader named Mrs. Pankhurst gives a speech that you read about in the newspaper. She talks about gloves explicitly. They tell us to keep our hands covered because uncovered hands are unseemly. But what they really mean is they want to keep our hands tied. As long as we're worried about the whiteness of our gloves, we're not thinking about the blackness of injustice. As long as we're focused on proper buttons and perfect stitching, we're not noticing that we have no property rights, no parental rights, no political rights. The gloves are a distraction, and we're done being distracted. The rhetoric is powerful, but you notice she's careful to note she's not criticizing women who choose to wear gloves, only criticizing the mandatory nature of the requirement and its use as a tool of social control. It's a smart distinction, preventing the movement from alienating potential supporters who aren't ready to abandon gloves entirely, but might support making them optional. You attend a meeting just to observe. You tell yourself where reform-minded women gather to discuss strategy. The room is full of women wearing various styles of gloves, from traditionally perfect to deliberately modified. One woman wears gloves with the fingers cut away. Another wears gloves but keeps removing and replacing them throughout the meeting, as though practicing defiance in safe space. A third wears no gloves at all, her bare hands shocking even in this progressive context. The speaker addresses the glove question directly. Some of you wonder whether this matters, whether focusing on gloves trivializes our larger goals. But I say gloves are exactly where we should focus, because gloves are where the personal becomes political. Every woman in this room has suffered for her gloves, has paid too much for them, has worn them in unbearable heat, has felt judged by their quality and cleanliness. We understand glove oppression intimately because we've lived it. And if we can't articulate why mandatory glove wearing is unjust, how will we articulate why mandatory political exclusion is unjust? The argument resonates with you more deeply than you expected. You look down at your own gloved hands, expensive, proper, perfect, and feel the weight of everything they represent. Not just fashion, not just propriety, but a whole system designed to keep you focused on appearance rather than substance, on conformity rather than autonomy, on being seen as acceptable rather than being heard as powerful. You don't become a radical that day. You don't throw off your gloves and storm any buildings. But something shifts in how you understand them. They're no longer just accessories or even just symbols of social status. They're part of a larger conversation about who controls women's bodies, women's choices, women's voices, and that conversation is just beginning. You're standing in the dressmaker's shop when the woman beside you orders something that makes your blood run cold. 6 pairs of black morning gloves, full length with jet buttons. Her voice is steady, but her hands shake as she provides measurements. You understand immediately someone has died, and now she's preparing to enter the elaborate theatre of Victorian mourning, where gloves play a role more complex and suffocating than anything you've yet encountered. The dressmaker nods solemnly and pulls out fabric samples in varying shades of black. Not just black, you realise, but dozens of blacks: coal black, crow black, raven black, midnight black, jet black, each supposedly appropriate for different stages of mourning, different relationships to the deceased, different contexts within the grieving period. You leave the shop feeling unsettled, but 3 months later you receive the telegram that every Victorian dreads your grandmother has passed. Within hours, your household transforms into a rigidly choreographed mourning production, and you're thrust into the leading role you never auditioned for. The first requirement arrives before the funeral is even planned: black gloves. Not just any black gloves, but specific mourning gloves that signal your relationship to the deceased, the stage of your grief, and your dedication to proper mourning protocol. Your mother produces a booklet titled The Mourner's Guide to Proper Dress, and the section on gloves runs to 23 pages. For the first 6 months deep mourning, you must wear black kid leather gloves, full length to above the elbow, with no decoration except jet or dull black buttons. The gloves must be replaced at the first sign of wear, as shabby mourning gloves suggest shabby grief. You're not permitted to wear your regular gloves during this period, even indoors, even in summer, even when logic screams that layered black leather into July heat is torture. Your aunt arrives to help with funeral preparations and inspect your mourning gloves with the same intensity Queen Victoria's ladies apply to presentation gloves. "These will do," she pronounces, examining the jet buttons. "But you must understand, mourning gloves are never removed in public. Never. Not at the funeral service. Not at the burial. Not at the reception afterward. To remove mourning gloves before the prescribed period is to suggest your grief has ended, which implies either you didn't truly love the deceased or you lack proper feeling. The rules multiply like a fungus. You learn that mourning gloves must be stored separately from regular gloves to prevent contamination of normal life with death's shadow. You discover that if you must shake hands during the mourning period, you do so with gloves firmly in place. Removing your glove for a handshake during mourning would be interpreted as offering inappropriate intimacy at a time when you should be withdrawn from normal social contact. The funeral itself becomes an exhibition of gloved hands unified in black. Everyone wears mourning gloves: family, friends, even servants. The church fills with people whose hands have disappeared into identical black coverings, as though death has erased all individuality and reduced everyone to uniform symbols of loss. You notice how the gloves make everyone's hands look the same, young and old, wealthy and modest, all rendered equal by grief's uniform. After the burial, you return home and expect to finally remove these suffocating black gloves. But your mother shakes her head. Not yet. Not for 6 months. This is deep mourning. Your grandmother was family. You must show proper respect. 6 months. 180 days of wearing black gloves everywhere except in the absolute privacy of your own bedroom. The prospect feels like a prison sentence. But you comply because the alternative, being seen without mourning gloves during the prescribed period, would scandalise your family and dishonour your grandmother's memory. Historians still argue whether Victorian mourning glove requirements genuinely helped the bereaved process grief, or whether they imposed additional suffering on people already in pain. Some suggest the rigid external requirements gave structure to chaotic emotions, providing clear guidelines when everything else felt uncertain. Others contend that forcing people to perform grief according to strict schedules prevented authentic emotional processing and extended suffering unnecessarily. A quirky and macabre detail emerges during your mourning period, apparently. Some wealthy families commissioned special mourning gloves embedded with the deceased's hair woven into the fabric. These gloves, considered precious heirlooms, allowed mourners to literally hold hands with the dead. The practice horrifies and fascinates you in equal measure. Imagine wearing gloves containing your grandmother's hair, feeling her presence against your skin with every movement. Some people found this comforting. You find it nightmarish. The stages of mourning bring different glove requirements, each with its own Byzantine rules. After 6 months of deep mourning in black kid leather, you transition to second mourning, which permits slightly less severe black gloves, shorter lengths, some small decorative elements, matte black buttons instead of jet. After another 6 months, you enter half mourning, where you can wear grey or purple gloves alongside black, though never cheerful colours and never white. The total mourning period for a grandparent 18 months, 547 days of restricted glove colours, and that's for a grandparent. If your parent or spouse dies, the mourning period extends to 2 full years, with even stricter glove requirements for the first year. You watch other mourners navigate these rules with varying degrees of success. Mrs. Pemberton, whose husband died 8 months ago, appears at church wearing black gloves that have developed a shine from wear. The whispers start immediately. She's either too poor to replace them or too indifferent to her late husband's memory to maintain proper standards. The truth, you later learn, is that she's financially ruined by her husband's debts and can't afford new mourning gloves. But this explanation doesn't protect her from judgment. Young widow Mrs. Ashford commits a worse transgression. She appears at a memorial service wearing black gloves but removes them briefly to dab her eyes with a handkerchief. The gesture seems natural, even touching, but the older ladies present are scandalized. She removed her mourning gloves, they hiss to each other. Not even 6 months since her husband's passing, and she's already abandoning proper grief. The cruelty of judging someone's glove choices while they were actively crying over a dead spouse strikes you as monstrous, but the rules operate with mechanical indifference to human emotion. Mourning protocol exists separate from actual grief, imposing its requirements regardless of how the mourner actually feels. You discover the supernatural dimension of mourning gloves during a conversation with your elderly great-aunt. Never remove mourning gloves before the prescribed period, she warns, her voice dropping to a whisper. The spirit of the deceased is watching. If you show disrespect by removing your mourning gloves too soon, the spirit may become angry, restless. I knew a woman who removed her mourning gloves after only 4 months. She was dead within a year, the same illness that took her husband. Coincidence? I think not. The superstition should be easy to dismiss, but you're living in an era where science and spiritualism coexist uneasily, where educated people attend seances and believe photographs can capture ghosts. The idea that your gloves somehow connect you to the spirit world, that removing them could invite supernatural consequences, gains traction in your tired, grief-fogged mind. Summer arrives, and you're still wearing black mourning gloves. The heat is unbearable. The gloves trap moisture, creating a damp, uncomfortable prison for your hands. You develop a rash where the leather rubs constantly against your wrists. Your hands ache from the constriction, but you keep the gloves on because the rules demand it, and because removing them would mean something about insufficient love, inadequate grief, improper respect. You attend a garden party during this period and feel like a ghost among the living. Everyone else wears light colours, delicate fabrics, cheerful whites and pastels. You're encased in black dress, black bonnet, black gloves that mark you as separate, as touched by death, as someone to be pitied and kept at arm's length. The mourning gloves do their job too well. creating a barrier between you and normal life that goes beyond mere fabric. Children stare at your black gloves with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Death is everywhere in Victorian England. Infant mortality is staggering. Diseases carry people off with shocking regularity, but it's still treated as something frightening, something to be marked and contained. Your black gloves announce death has touched this person, and everyone responds by maintaining extra distance, as though grief might be contagious. The psychological weight of performative mourning crushes you more than the actual grief. You miss your grandmother, certainly, but you're exhausted by the constant requirement to demonstrate that loss through your clothing. The gloves become a resentment. You're not mourning for yourself anymore. You're mourning for public consumption, proving to observers that you're sufficiently sad, properly respectful, adequately devastated. You find yourself thinking about the suffragettes' glove protests with new understanding. They're fighting against voluntary restrictions on glove wearing. But mourning gloves aren't voluntary. They're mandatory performance of grief whether you feel it or not. The hypocrisy strikes you. Society demands you wear gloves to show feelings you may not have, while preventing you from expressing other feelings you do have. 5 months into your mourning period, you're in your bedroom alone and you do something forbidden. You remove your mourning gloves and put on a pair of white ones from before your grandmother's death. Just for 5 minutes. Just to remember what normal felt like. The white gloves feel incredibly light, almost insubstantial. They make your hands look alive again rather than mummified in black. You stand before your mirror, looking at your white-gloved hands, and feel a wave of guilt so intense it nearly buckles your knees. Your grandmother would be disappointed. Your family would be horrified. Society would judge you. And somewhere, according to superstition, your grandmother's spirit is watching, possibly angered by this disrespect. You tear off the white gloves and shove them to the back of a drawer. You pull the black mourning gloves back on, your hands shaking. For the rest of the mourning period, you don't dare repeat the experiment. The black gloves stay on, a constant reminder of loss and of the prison Victorian society constructs around that loss. When the 18-month mourning period finally ends, you're given permission to wear coloured gloves again. You choose a pale grey pair, not quite white, not ready for full colour yet. Your hands in grey gloves feel strange, exposed, almost naked despite being covered. You've spent so long in mourning black that normal gloves seem inappropriately cheerful. Your mother notices your hesitation. It's natural to feel uncertain, she says. Mourning becomes a habit. Some women never fully leave it. She's wearing black gloves herself, still mourning your grandfather who died 7 years ago. She's chosen to extend her mourning indefinitely, and you realise with horror that this is possible, that some women make mourning their permanent identity, hiding inside black gloves forever. You're determined not to become such a woman. But the mourning glove experience has marked you, taught you that gloves can be more than fashion or even social signalling. They can be chains that bind you to the past, to death, to suffering you're required to perform long after genuine grief has evolved into something more complex. You're attending a garden party on the hottest day of summer, and you can feel sweat pooling inside your gloves before you even exit the carriage. The temperature must be approaching 90 degrees, the air thick and still, offering no relief. Around you, other guests emerge from their carriages looking equally miserable, their faces carefully composed into expressions of pleasant anticipation, while their bodies scream discomfort. The hostess, Lady Worthington, greets arrivals at the entrance to her gardens, wearing pristine white gloves that show no hint of dampness despite the oppressive heat. You wonder if she's somehow immune to perspiration, or if she's simply changing gloves every 15 minutes behind the hedges when no one's watching. Both explanations seem equally plausible and equally exhausting. Within 10 minutes of arrival, your gloves are soaked through. You can feel moisture running down your forearms, gathering at your wrists where the glove tops constrict circulation. The kid leather that felt so elegant in Madame Celeste's cool atelier now feels like hot, wet cloth clinging to your skin. Every movement of your fingers squelches slightly, and you're terrified that if you shake hands with anyone, they'll feel the dampness and know that you're suffering. But everyone is suffering. You see it in the way Lady Ashford keeps her hands rigidly at her sides, afraid to gesture and reveal the water stains spreading across her glove fabric. You notice Miss Thornbury's gloves have developed visible wrinkles from the moisture, the formerly smooth leather now bunched and creased. Mr. Harrison's white evening gloves. Why is he wearing evening gloves to an afternoon garden party have turned slightly grey from absorbing sweat mixed with whatever residue was on his hands. The worst part is that you can't acknowledge the discomfort. To complain about the heat would be to suggest Lady Worthington chose an inappropriate day for her party. To mention your gloves' condition would be to admit you're sweating, which ladies supposedly don't. Do they glow or perspire lightly, but never sweat like common labourers? So everyone pretends they're comfortable, that their gloves are fine, that standing in direct sunlight wearing layers of fabric, including full-length gloves, is perfectly pleasant. You retreat to a refreshment table under a tent, hoping for shade and cool beverages. The lemonade appears in crystal glasses, condensation already beading on the outside. You accept a glass with your gloved hands and feel the cold dampness transfer immediately to the fabric. Now your gloves are wet from both internal sweat and external condensation, creating a clammy sensation that makes you want to tear them off and plunge your hands into the ice bucket meant for chilling champagne. But you can't. So you stand there, holding your freezing, damp glass with your hot, damp hands encased in wet leather, maintaining a pleasant smile and making conversation about the weather that's torturing everyone present. Lovely day for a garden party, Mrs. Pemberton says. Her own gloves visibly soaked at the wrists. Indeed, perfect weather, you reply. Your gloves now transferring moisture to the glass handle, making it slippery and difficult to hold. This is hell, you think. This is an actual circle of hell that Dante forgot to include well-dressed people standing in garden heat, slowly cooking inside their clothing while pretending everything is delightful. Historians still argue whether Victorian-era accounts of summer glove torture were exaggerated for dramatic effect, or whether people genuinely suffered to this degree. Some scholars point to medical journals from the period documenting cases of heat exhaustion and rashes directly attributed to excessive layering, including gloves worn in inappropriate conditions. Others suggest that people adapted to different comfort standards and weren't as miserable as modern readers might assume. But the evidence letters, diaries, even contemporary cartoons mocking garden party glove discomfort suggests the suffering was quite real. A quirky medical development from this era, several physicians published papers proposing ventilated gloves with tiny perforations to allow air circulation. Samples were manufactured and marketed briefly. The problem? The perforations were visible, making the gloves look like they'd been attacked by moths. No one would wear them, preferring genuine discomfort to the appearance of wearing damaged goods. The ventilated glove experiment failed within a year, and everyone went back to suffocating in solid leather. You watch Miss Caroline attempt to eat a cucumber sandwich while wearing wet gloves. The bread sticks to the damp fabric. She tries to pull it away discreetly, but the sandwich disintegrates, leaving bread fragments adhere to her glove fingers, she excuses herself, presumably to find a servant who can help her clean the mess without removing her gloves entirely. The logistics of maintaining gloves through a summer garden party approach military campaign complexity. The croquet lawn beckons, offering activity that might distract from the discomfort. But you quickly realise that playing croquet in damp gloves is nearly impossible. The mallet handle slips in your grip. Your ability to judge the force of your swing is compromised by the wet layer between your skin and the wood. You hit your ball sideways, missing the wicket entirely, and apologise while secretly thinking that anyone expecting accurate croquet playing under these conditions is delusional. Lady Worthington circulates among her guests, and you notice she has indeed changed her gloves. These are a different pair than she wore to greet arrivals. Still pristinely dry and wrinkle-free, she must have a maid stationed somewhere with a supply of fresh gloves, allowing her to maintain the fiction that she's unaffected by the heat that's destroying everyone else. The privilege of hostess status includes the right to cheat at glove endurance. Apparently, as afternoon stretches toward evening with no temperature drop, some guests begin making excuses to leave. Prior commitment, they claim, or sudden headache, or unexpected family matter requiring immediate attention. Everyone understands they're actually fleeing because they can't tolerate the heat torture anymore. But the fiction is maintained. No one admits they're leaving because their gloves are instruments of suffering. You consider joining the exodus, but your mother's warning glance pins you in place. Leaving early from a garden party is acceptable if you're genuinely ill, or if a real emergency arises. Leaving because you're hot is admitting weakness, suggesting you lack the fortitude required of proper ladies. So you stay, suffering through another hour of polite conversation while your hands feel like they're being slowly boiled inside leather pouches. A young woman you don't recognise does what you've been fantasising about for hours. She removes their gloves, just pulls them off, right there on the lawn, in front of everyone. The reaction is immediate and severe. Conversations halt mid-sentence. Heads turn. Lady Worthington appears as if summoned by scandal, her face a mask of horror. "My dear," she says in a voice that could cut glass, "I believe you're feeling unwell. Let me have a servant escort you to your carriage." It's not a suggestion. It's an ejection disguised as concern. The young woman, realising her mistake too late, tries to put her gloves back on, but the damage is done. She's removed gloves at a social function without permission, and now she's being sent home like a misbehaving child. You watch her retreat, humiliated, and feel a mixture of pity and envy. She'll face social consequences for her impulsive act, but at least she got to feel air on her hands for a few precious moments. The incident casts a pall over the remaining party. Everyone becomes hyper-aware of their own gloves, terrified that discomfort might lead them to make a similar error. You press your lips together and silently recite poetry, a technique your deportment instructor taught you for enduring discomfort. Distract the mind, and the body follows. It helps marginally. Your hands still feel like they're marinating in their own perspiration, but at least you're not thinking about it constantly. When you finally return home as evening approaches, the first thing you do is tear off your gloves. They're ruined, stained with sweat, stretched out of shape from the moisture, the leather permanently wrinkled. Hours of wear in summer heat have destroyed gloves that cost enough to feed a family for weeks. You'll need to order replacements, and the cycle will begin again. Your maid draws you a bath, and you sit in cool water, looking at your hands. They're red and wrinkled from being trapped in wet leather for 6 hours. You've developed small blisters where the seams rubbed against damp skin. Your wrists show clear lines where the glove tops constricted swollen flesh. Your hands look like they have been tortured, which in a sense they have been. Why do we do this, you ask your maid, who's seen dozens of ruined summer gloves over the years. Because if you don't, miss, you're not received in society, she replies pragmatically. And if you're not received, you don't marry well. And if you don't marry well, she doesn't finish the sentence. She doesn't need to. You both understand the economics of being a woman in Victorian England. Your gloves are expensive, painful, and absurd, but they're also your admission ticket to the only life path considered acceptable for someone of your class. You think about the suffragettes who remove their gloves as political protest, and suddenly their actions seem less radical and more inevitable. How long can an entire gender be expected to torture their hands in service of arbitrary rules before someone rebels? You're not ready to join the rebellion, not yet. Maybe not ever, but you understand it now in your aching, blistered hands in a way you couldn't when your hands were comfortable. The next garden party invitation arrives 3 days later. The same hostess, the same summer heat projected. You consider claiming illness, but your mother won't permit it. You've been seen at one of Lady Worthington's parties. Declining the next without excellent reason would be insulting. So you'll go. You'll wear fresh gloves that will be destroyed by the afternoon's heat. You'll stand in the sun pretending everything is pleasant while sweat pools inside leather that cost a small fortune. You'll maintain perfect composure while your hands scream for relief. You'll perform the torture willingly because refusing means social death. And social death is apparently worse than physical discomfort. That night, you dream of winter of cold air and bare hands, of freedom from fabric prisons, of a world where you could exist without constantly managing your gloves' appearance and condition. You wake to summer heat and the knowledge that winter is months away. And even then, you'll be wearing different gloves, heavier, warmer, still confining. There's no season where your hands are free. There's no time when gloves don't matter. You're trapped in a lifetime sentence of hand covering. And summer just makes the sentence more obviously punitive. You're watching your 5-year-old niece, Charlotte, struggle with her first pair of proper gloves, and the scene is both endearing and heartbreaking. The child's face contorts with concentration as she attempts to work her small fingers into the white cotton gloves her mother has deemed essential for her debut at Sunday church service. Each finger goes into the wrong slot. The thumb won't cooperate. Charlotte's frustration builds until tears threaten. Like this, darling, your sister demonstrates for the 4th time. Her patience wearing visibly thin. First finger here, second finger here. Thumb in this space. No, Charlotte, the thumb doesn't go there. That's for your index finger. Start again. Charlotte starts again, her small hands trembling with effort and anxiety. She's been practicing glove donning for 3 weeks now, ever since her parents decided she was old enough to attend adult church services rather than remaining in the nursery. This is her graduation into society, miniature though it may be. And it comes with the same glove requirements that will govern the rest of her life. You remember your own glove training at Charlotte's age, the endless repetitions, the scolding when you got it wrong, the praise so carefully rationed that you worked desperately to earn it. Your childhood governess made you practice putting on gloves for an hour each day, timing you with a pocket watch, insisting you reduce the process to under 3 minutes. Faster than 3 minutes suggested carelessness. Slower suggested incompetence. The acceptable window was impossibly narrow. Charlotte finally succeeds in getting her gloves on, but they're twisted, wrinkled, and one thumb is only halfway inserted. Her mother sighs and removes them, starting the process again from the beginning. A lady's gloves must be perfect. Charlotte, imperfect gloves mean an imperfect lady. Do you want people to think you're imperfect? The question is cruel in its simplicity. Of course, Charlotte doesn't want to be imperfect. She's 5 years old and wants desperately to please the adults who control her world. So she tries again, her small face set with determination that seems far too adult for her age. The gloves themselves are tiny works of art, white cotton with 6 pearl buttons each, sized precisely for Charlotte's small hands. They cost nearly as much as an adult pair because children's gloves require the same craftsmanship applied to smaller dimensions, which is actually more difficult than making adult sizes. The buttons are functional rather than decorative. Charlotte must learn to button and unbutton them herself, developing the finger dexterity that will serve her throughout her glove-wearing life. You accompany Charlotte to church the following Sunday and watch her navigate her first public appearance in gloves. She's terrified of doing something wrong. Her small hands held rigidly at her sides, fingers barely moving. When it's time to stand for hymns, she struggles to hold the heavy hymnal with her gloved hands. When the collection plate passes, she fumbles with her penny, nearly dropping it before managing to deposit it with both hands. Other children at the service display varying levels of glove competence. The vicar's daughter, age 7, wears her gloves with the casual confidence of long practice. The merchant's son, age 6, has already developed a wrinkle across his right palm from gripping things too tightly. Charlotte's contemporary, young Miss Ashford, has managed to get a smudge on her glove thumb, and her mother's furious whispers carry 3 rows back. After the service, children are expected to greet adult parishioners with proper glove etiquette, which means not removing gloves for handshakes, keeping gloved hands visible but not fidgeting with them, and maintaining pristine white glove appearance despite an hour of sitting, standing, and holding various objects. Charlotte passes this test adequately, though you see the relief on her face when you finally return home and she's permitted to remove the gloves. "My hands hurt," she whispers to you, showing you red marks where the glove seams pressed against her small fingers. "Do I have to wear them every Sunday?" "Every Sunday," you confirm, and eventually to parties and calls and shopping and anywhere else that proper ladies go, you'll get used to them. But will she? Should she? You're watching your niece being inducted into the same system that's constrained you, and for the first time you question whether this is truly necessary. Charlotte is 5. Her hands are perfect little hands that should be touching flowers and playing with toys and learning to write, not trapped inside cotton prisons that serve no function except to signal her family's social aspirations. Historians still argue whether early glove training genuinely helped children develop fine motor skills and attention to detail, or whether it was needlessly cruel imposition of adult standards on developing bodies. Some period sources praise glove training as character building, teaching children self-control and attention to appearance. Others, primarily from reform movements, condemn it as torture that prioritizes performance over child development and comfort. A quirky detail emerges from Victorian child-rearing manuals. Several books recommend starting glove training as early as age 3, with special training gloves that have coloured fingertips to help children learn which finger goes where. These training gloves were meant to be used at home, never in public, like training wheels before children graduated to real gloves for real society. The manuals are disturbingly detailed about punishments for glove failures, loss of dessert, earlier bedtime, cancellation of playtime as though a 3-year-old's inability to properly don gloves represents genuine moral failure. You visit your sister the following week and find Charlotte in tears, her governess standing over her with a stern expression. The offence Charlotte wore her Sunday gloves while playing in the garden and got a grass stain on the right palm. The gloves are ruined. The governess is explaining that Charlotte's carelessness has cost her parents money they shouldn't have to spend replacing gloves that should have lasted months. "She's 5 years old," you say before you can stop yourself. "She forgot she was wearing them. It's an understandable mistake." The governess turns her disapproving gaze on you. Understandable mistakes at 5 become habits at 15. Miss Charlotte must learn now that gloves are not playthings. their responsibilities. She must remain constantly aware of them, constantly careful. You want to argue that constant awareness of hand coverings is no way for a child to experience life. But you recognise the futility. The governess is implementing the same training you received, that your mother received, that stretches back generations. She's not being cruel by her own standards, she's being thorough, ensuring Charlotte will meet society's expectations when she debuts properly at age 18. Charlotte receives replacement gloves and begins wearing them for an hour each afternoon as practice, even when not leaving the house. You visit during these practice sessions and watch her sit in the drawing room, small hands folded in her lap, learning to be still, to be decorative, to prioritise appearance over comfort or natural movement. She's being trained like a show dog. And the saddest part is she's trying so hard to be good at it. The neighbour's boy, young Thomas Worthington, aged 6, joined Charlotte for deportment lessons one afternoon. You watch both children learn the intricacies of gloved greetings between opposite sexes. Thomas must remove the right glove to shake hands with Charlotte, but only after she's offered her gloved hand. If he removes his glove preemptively, he's being presumptuous. If he fails to remove it when she offers her hand, he's being rude. The timing window for correct glove removal is approximately 2 seconds. They practice this exchange for 45 minutes until both children can execute it reflexively. Thomas removes his glove. They shake hands briefly. Thomas replaces his glove. Over and over and over until the actions become automatic, bypassing conscious thought entirely. This is the goal, to embed glove protocol so deeply that it operates on instinct, freeing conscious mind for other matters while hands perform their choreographed duties without supervision. Charlotte begins attending children's tea parties, where groups of 5 to 8-year-olds sit in miniature drawing rooms, wearing miniature versions of adult clothing including gloves, practicing adult social rituals scaled down to child size. You chaperoning one such event and feel like you're watching a play performed by actors who don't quite understand their roles, but know they'll be punished for forgetting lines. The children hold tiny teacups with gloved hands, attempting to drink without spilling. They pass plates of small cakes, their gloved fingers struggling with the dexterity required. They make stilted conversation about weather and flowers, topics adults have deemed appropriate for children's practice. And through it all, they monitor their gloves, checking for wrinkles, adjusting when buttons come loose, painfully aware that their performance is being evaluated by watchful adults stationed around the room. One little girl starts crying because she spilled tea on her glove and knows she'll face consequences at home. Another child has twisted her glove so badly it's cutting off circulation to her fingers. But she's afraid to ask for help because asking for help means admitting she put them on incorrectly. Charlotte sits frozen in her chair, hands motionless on her lap, so terrified of making a mistake that she's barely participating in the party at all. You want to gather all these children and tell them the truth that gloves don't matter, that stains wash out, that their worth as human beings has nothing to do with how perfectly they wear hand coverings. But you don't, because in the world they're being prepared to inhabit, gloves absolutely do matter. These children aren't learning arbitrary rules. They're learning survival skills for the social environments they'll navigate as adults. Charlotte's 8th birthday brings more elaborate gloves, white kid leather with real pearl buttons, similar in construction to your own adult gloves but size for her growing hands. She's delighted with them initially, viewing them as evidence of her maturation, but within weeks the novelty fades and they become just another daily burden, another thing to monitor and maintain and worry about. You take Charlotte shopping with you one afternoon, both of you properly gloved, and watch her navigate the experience. She must keep her gloves on while examining fabric samples, which means she can't really feel the materials she's supposedly evaluating. She must maintain pristine glove appearance while handling merchandise that shopkeepers present, which means she touches everything so gingerly she can barely examine items properly. She's learning the same impossible balancing act you've mastered, appearing to engage with the world while maintaining a barrier that prevents genuine engagement. On the walk home, Charlotte asks you a question that stops you in your tracks. "Aunt, when I'm grown up, will I ever get to take my gloves off?" You consider lying, offering some platitude about how she'll adapt and stop noticing them, but Charlotte deserves honesty. Sometimes, you tell her, in private, when you're alone or with only family, but in public, around people who matter to your social standing, no, probably not very often. Charlotte processes this in silence for several steps. Then, that seems like a long time to wear something uncomfortable. It is a long time. You agree. A lifetime. Actually, she doesn't cry. She doesn't protest. She just nods, accepting this reality the way children accept many incomprehensible adult rules, with resignation born from understanding that resistance is futile. And watching this acceptance settle over her small shoulders feels like watching a door close, like seeing potential freedom exchange for social acceptability, like witnessing the moment when a child becomes complicit in her own constraint. That night, you write a letter to a reform-minded friend who's been advocating for simplified children's clothing. You don't mention Charlotte by name, but you describe what you've witnessed children as young as 5 being trained to prioritise appearance over comfort, to monitor their gloves more carefully than their own thoughts and feelings, to accept physical discomfort as the price of social acceptability. You're not sure anything will change. Probably nothing will, but at least you've documented it, this quiet cruelty that masquerades as proper child-rearing, this system that catches children early and shapes them into adults who can't imagine life without gloves, even when those gloves cause nothing but suffering. You're seated in a physician's office, your gloved hands folded primly in your lap, while Dr. Blackwell delivers a lecture that challenges everything you've been taught about glove wearing. He's one of the new progressive doctors, educated at Edinburgh and influenced by continental medical theories, and his views on gloves are nothing short of revolutionary and controversial. The constant wearing of gloves, he says, gesturing to your hands, prevents the skin from breathing properly. The leather traps moisture and heat, creating an environment where bacteria and fungi thrive. I've treated dozens of cases of hand rashes, fungal infections, and even permanent skin damage directly attributable to excessive glove wearing. You shift uncomfortably, suddenly aware of the dampness inside your own gloves. You've noticed the rash developing between your fingers over the past month, but you assumed it was simply part of the discomfort every lady endures. The idea that it might be preventable worse, that the cure might be removing your gloves, fills you with equal parts hope and dread. Doctor. Blackwell produces a medical journal and shows you photographs that make you wince. Hands with severe rashes, fingers with fungal infections that have destroyed the nail beds, palm skin that's become permanently discoloured from years of leather contact. These are not isolated cases, he insists. These are predictable outcomes of forcing skin to remain constantly covered in non-breathable materials. But surely, you say, proper hygiene prevents such outcomes. If one maintains clean gloves and washes one's hands regularly. Washing helps, he interrupts, but doesn't eliminate the fundamental problem. Human skin requires air circulation. It requires contact with sunlight, yes. Even women's hands benefit from moderate sun exposure. And it requires periods of rest from constriction. Your gloves, no matter how well made, are essentially continuous bandages on healthy appendages. Would you bandage an uninjured arm for years on end? Of course not. Yet that's precisely what you're doing to your hands. The argument is compelling, but you immediately see the impossibility of implementing his recommendations. Doctor, you're essentially suggesting I appear in public without gloves. That would be social suicide. I might as well appear without a skirt. Doctor, Blackwell nods sympathetically. I understand the social constraints. I'm not unsympathetic to them, but I am telling you, as a medical professional, that the health costs of constant glove wearing are significant and largely preventable. At minimum, you should remove your gloves whenever possible in private. At home, even just for a few hours daily to allow your skin to recover. You already do this, of course. But his suggestion that you should do it more frequently collides with the reality of your schedule. Between social calls, shopping expeditions, church services, charity work, and various other obligations, you're in public and therefore gloved from 10 in the morning until 6 in the evening most days. The few hours of glove freedom at home barely seem sufficient for the skin recovery, Doctor. Blackwell prescribes. The medical debate over gloves has been raging for several years. You learn. You begin reading medical journals in your father's library, discovering a fascinating and contentious discourse. One camp of physicians, mostly traditional and older, argues that gloves serve essential hygienic functions. They prevent disease transmission, protect delicate skin from environmental damage, and maintain the cleanliness necessary for proper health. The other camp, younger and influenced by new scientific methods, argues that gloves create more health problems than they solve. Doctor Pemberton, a traditional physician who's been the family doctor for decades, visits your home for an unrelated matter and you broach the subject with him. His response is immediate and dismissive. Doctor Blackwell and his continental theories, the man's a menace. Gloves protect women's delicate skin from all manner of environmental hazards, coal smoke, dust, germs, inappropriate handling. Women who appear without gloves might as well expose themselves to smallpox deliberately. The hyperbole is extreme, but Dr. Pemberton genuinely believes it. He produces his own set of articles arguing that glove wearing prevents arthritis, protects against cold damage, and even maintains better moral hygiene by creating a barrier between women and the corrupting touch of the outside world. That last argument seems particularly absurd, as though leather can prevent moral contamination, but he presents it with complete sincerity. Historians still argue whether Victorian-era medical concerns about glove wearing were genuine health debates, or whether they were proxy arguments about women's autonomy and social roles. Some scholars point to legitimate medical observations about skin conditions and infections. Others note that the physicians most vocally opposing gloves tended to also support women's education and suffrage, while those defending gloves aligned with traditional views about women's proper place in society. The gloves, in this interpretation, were never really about hands, they were about control. A quirky medical development from this period, several inventors patented medicinal gloves infused with various substances supposedly beneficial to skin health. These gloves were lined with chamomile, lavender, glycerin, or even diluted carbolic acid. Advertisements promised they would heal while concealing and allow ladies to maintain propriety while addressing skin damage. The gloves sold poorly, mostly because they cost twice what regular gloves cost, and the medical benefits were entirely unproven. Within a few years, they disappeared from the market entirely. You attend a lecture on women's health where a female physician, a rarity itself, discusses the various medical complaints she's observed in her exclusively female practice. When she reaches the topic of hand health, several women in the audience lean forward with obvious interest. I see hand complaints in nearly a third of my patients. Doctor, Margaret Wilson explains, rashes, swelling, nerve compression, reduced dexterity, and chronic pain, all attributable to or exacerbated by constant glove wearing. Yet when I suggest reducing glove usage, my patients look at me as though I've suggested they appear in public naked. The social costs apparently outweigh any health benefits. A brave woman in the audience raises her hand. Doctor, if you were to design ideal glove-wearing practices from a purely medical standpoint, what would you recommend, Doctor? Wilson considers carefully. Ideally no gloves except when actually needed for cold protection, for handling hazardous materials, for specific tasks. Barring that ideal, I'd recommend gloves made from breathable materials like fine cotton rather than leather. Looser fits that don't constrict circulation. Frequent removal to allow skin exposure to air and light. And most importantly, recognition that some discomfort is a warning sign to be heeded rather than ignored. Every recommendation directly contradicts social requirements. The finest social gloves are tight-fitting kid leather. They're meant to be worn for hours without removal, and discomfort is considered inevitable, something to be endured rather than addressed. The disconnect between medical advice and social reality is complete. You begin an experiment, wearing gloves that are slightly looser than perfect fit, choosing cotton over leather when social context permits, and removing your gloves more frequently at home. Within 3 weeks, your rash improves noticeably. Your hands feel less swollen in the mornings. The chronic ache in your finger joints diminishes. But you also notice other women at social events looking at your slightly loose gloves with questions in their eyes. One acquaintance asked directly, "New gloves, they seem to fit rather generously." The observation is coded criticism. Your gloves don't fit with the painted-on perfection that signals quality and attention to detail. You've prioritized comfort over appearance, and it shows. You make excuses about the glover getting measurements slightly wrong and promise to have them adjusted, even though you have no intention of tightening them back to their original uncomfortable perfection. Your mother notices the change too. "Your gloves look sloppy," she says bluntly, one morning before a shopping expedition. "Either get them properly fitted or wear a different pair. People will think we can't afford proper gloves." You explain, Doctor, Blackwell's recommendations, showing her your improved hands as evidence of medical benefit. She's unmoved. Your great-grandmother wore properly fitted gloves until the day she died at age 87. If gloves were genuinely harmful, she'd have lost her hands decades earlier. This is modern medical nonsense designed to undermine proper standards. The generational divide couldn't be clearer. Your mother's generation accepts discomfort as inevitable and views medical complaints about gloves as weakness or attention-seeking. Your generation is beginning to question whether suffering is truly necessary, whether the old ways are genuinely the best ways. You find an ally in your cousin Margaret, who confesses she's been consulting Dr. Wilson for chronic hand pain that makes it difficult to play piano. "She told me I'm essentially giving myself carpal tunnel syndrome through constant glove compression," Margaret whispers during a private moment at a family gathering. "She's prescribed hand exercises and regular glove-free periods. My playing has improved dramatically." But Margaret is also terrified of being discovered prioritizing medical advice over social requirements. She performs her hand exercises behind closed doors and creates elaborate excuses for why she sometimes appears at informal family gatherings without gloves. "I've just applied a medicinal hand cream that will stain fabric." Or, "My maid is adjusting the buttons on my regular pairs." The medical debate intensifies in popular press. You read competing articles, the necessity of gloves for female health versus how gloves harm women's hands. Editorial writers take sides. Usually along predictable lines, conservative publications defend gloves. Progressive ones attack them. the discourse becomes so heated that it stops being about actual medical evidence and becomes instead a battle over whether women's health matters more than women's social presentation. A particularly contentious article suggests that working-class women, who generally can't afford constant glove wearing, actually have healthier hands than their upper-class counterparts. The article includes photographs comparing the hands of a factory worker and a society lady. The factory worker's hands are rough, calloused, and darkened by work. The society lady's hands are pale, soft, but covered with rashes, wrinkles, and early signs of arthritis. Which hands, the article asks provocatively, are actually healthier? Which woman can use her hands more effectively, and what does it say about our society that we value appearance over function, social signals over physical well-being? The article causes outrage in your social circles. Several ladies write response pieces defending glove wearing as both healthful and necessary. They argue that the society lady's hands are more refined, more civilized, more human, while the factory worker's hands are animal-like in their roughness. The classism is blatant and ugly, but it reflects genuinely held beliefs about what constitutes proper femininity. You're caught between understanding both arguments. Yes, constant glove wearing damages hands. You've seen the evidence in medical journals and experienced it in your own body. But you've also seen what happens to women who reject glove conventions, social ostracism, diminished marriage prospects, limited opportunities. The cost of healthy hands might be social death, and asking women to choose between physical and social well-being isn't really offering a choice at all. Dr. Blackwell publishes a paper proposing what he calls rational glove-wearing guidelines that balance medical needs with social realities. Wear gloves in public as required, but choose looser fits and breathable materials. Remove gloves immediately upon returning home. Never sleep in gloves. Perform daily hand exercises to maintain circulation and flexibility. Allow hands regular exposure to air and moderate sunlight. The recommendations are reasonable, achievable, and probably helpful. They're also insufficient to address the fundamental problem that an entire gender is being forced to prioritize appearance over health, to accept preventable damage as the cost of social acceptability, to choose between their hands' well-being and their place in society. You're left implementing small rebellions where you can slightly looser gloves, cotton instead of leather when possible, extra hours of glove freedom at home. Your hands improve marginally, your social standing remains mostly intact, and you live with a compromise, knowing it's inadequate but understanding it's the best available option in a world that values covered hands over healthy ones. You're standing in the receiving line at King Edward VII's first state banquet since ascending to the throne after his mother's death, and you feel the tectonic plates of Victorian society shifting beneath your feet. The new king, known for his more relaxed continental tastes, has just done something unprecedented. He's greeted a duchess who accidentally dropped her glove with a reassuring smile rather than the disapproving silence such a transgression would have earned under Queen Victoria. The whispers ripple through the assembled guests like wind through wheat. Did you see that the king smiled? He didn't seem offended at all. Perhaps the rules are changing. The speculation is cautious, tentative, because everyone remembers how swiftly Victoria punished glove infractions. But something is definitely different, and you can feel the collective anxiety mixing with cautious hope. King Edward himself appears in the ballroom wearing gloves that you have to look twice to confirm are slightly less formal than tradition demands. They're the correct white kid leather. Yes, but they lack the elaborate stitching and ostentatious buttons that Victorian formality required. They're elegant but understated, continental in style rather than rigidly English. It's a subtle statement, But in a world where gloves carry more meaning than words, it's practically a revolutionary declaration. Over the following months, the relaxation becomes more pronounced. At a garden party, the king removes his gloves during a croquet game, plays several rounds with bare hands, then puts them back on for refreshments without anyone collapsing in horror. Ladies who witness this find themselves wondering if the king can remove gloves for croquet. Does that mean we can too? The question remains unasked aloud, but it hangs in the air like perfume. Your mother, staunch defender of Victorian values, watches these developments with mounting distress. The king is undermining everything his mother built, she says over breakfast one morning, having just read about another relaxed glove protocol at a royal function. If standards erode at the top, they'll collapse entirely below. Mark my words, within a decade we'll have ladies appearing at court with bare hands like common shopgirls. But you're not so sure erosion is the right word. Evolution might be more accurate. You attend a reception where you witness something remarkable. Queen Alexandra, the new queen consort, greeting guests while wearing gloves that are clearly designed for comfort as much as appearance. They're beautiful, certainly, but they're also constructed with some innovation that allows more flexibility in the fingers. Several ladies gather around afterward discussing where they might commission similar gloves. The French have been wearing these styles for years, Lady Pemberton explains, examining the Queen's gloves from a respectful distance. More practical construction, less emphasis on extreme tightness. I've commissioned a pair from a Parisian glover. They arrive next month. The statement would have been scandalous under Victoria, preferring French gloves over English ones, prioritising comfort over rigid perfection. But now it's merely interesting, a choice rather than a transgression. The permission to choose feels revolutionary after decades of non-negotiable requirements. Young women entering society notice the changes most acutely. Your cousin Jane, making her debut this season, reports that the white glove test is still administered but with noticeably less severity. The lady-in-waiting checked my gloves, certainly, Jane tells you. But when she found a tiny wrinkle near my wrist, she just smoothed it gently and smiled. Under Queen Victoria, that wrinkle would have meant dismissal. Now it's barely worth noticing. The relaxation isn't universal or instantaneous. Conservative elements push back hard. Several society matrons form what they call the Society for the Preservation of Proper Standards, dedicated to maintaining Victorian-era glove protocols despite the King's more lenient approach. They circulate pamphlets warning that relaxed glove standards will lead to moral decay, social chaos, and the collapse of British civilization as they know it. The pamphlets are simultaneously earnest and absurd. If young ladies cannot maintain proper glove discipline, one declares, how shall they maintain proper moral discipline? The connection between external standards and internal character is absolute. A society that tolerates wrinkled gloves today will tolerate moral wrinkles tomorrow. The metaphor is tortured, but the anxiety is genuine. Historians still argue whether Edward VII's relaxation of court protocols genuinely reflected his personal preferences, or whether he was responding to broader social pressures for reform. Some scholars point to his documented discomfort with his mother's rigid formality and his preference for continental sophistication over English stuffiness. Others suggest he recognised that the emerging 20th century required more flexibility, that clinging to Victorian strictness would make the monarchy seem increasingly irrelevant. A quirky development, several etiquette book publishers rush out new editions specifically addressing Edwardian glove etiquette. These books attempt to codify the new, more relaxed standards, but they struggle because the standards are still evolving in real time. One book recommends gloves may be removed during tennis revolutionary. Another suggests that at informal summer gatherings, fingerless lace gloves are acceptable unprecedented. A third proposes that gentlemen need only carry 2 pairs of gloves in daily rotation, rather than 3 economical. Each suggestion would have been heretical 5 years ago. Now they're merely progressive, and within a few more years they'll probably be mainstream. You're living through a period of rapid social change, and gloves are both symptom and symbol of that transformation. You attend a ball where you witness the generational divide in stark terms. Older ladies, trained under Victoria, maintain rigid glove perfection, pristine white kid leather, perfectly fitted, never removed regardless of discomfort. Middle-aged women navigate uncertain middle ground, mostly traditional, but with small accommodations to comfort like slightly looser fits. Young women experiment boldly, some wear coloured gloves that would have been scandalous 5 years ago. Others wear innovative styles with easier closures. A few brave souls appear in fashionable fingerless gloves that blur the line between covered and uncovered. The young Duke of Marlborough makes a statement by appearing in gloves that, you count them only buttoned halfway up his forearm rather than completely to the top. It's a tiny rebellion, but everyone notices. By the end of the evening, 3 other young men have subtly unbuttoned their top glove buttons in imitation. Fashion is changing in real time, driven by royal permission and youth's perpetual desire to distinguish itself from the older generation. Your brother Thomas, now established in his career, reports similar changes in men's glove culture. The 3-glove rule is falling away, he tells you. At my club, several members appear with only 2 pairs in rotation, and no one comments. Some chaps are even wearing the same gloves for both day and evening calls, provided they're clean. The rigid categorization my valet insisted upon when I was younger seems almost quaint now. The economic implications are significant. Reducing from 3 gloves in daily rotation to 2 means substantial savings, not just for wealthy men but for the growing middle class, attempting to maintain gentlemen's standards on limited budgets. The relaxation of glove requirements effectively makes gentlemen's status more accessible, potentially democratizing social circles that were previously closed to all but the quite wealthy. Women experience similar economic relief. You calculate that if you can extend the life of each pair of gloves by even a month through less rigid wearing requirements, you'll save enough over a year to fund an entire new wardrobe addition. When you mention this to your friends, their eyes light up with the same realization. Glove relaxation isn't just about comfort, it's about economics, accessibility, and the possibility of maintaining social standards without bankrupting oneself. Conservative publications warn that economic accessibility will destroy social hierarchies. If middle-class women can meet glove standards as easily as aristocratic women, how will one distinguish between classes? The anxiety reveals what everyone already knew but rarely said aloud. Glove requirements were never really about hygiene or propriety. They were about maintaining barriers, about ensuring that social advancement required not just ambition, but substantial financial resources. The suffragettes, of course, had claimed vindication. We said the glove rules were about control, not civilization, their publications declare. Now even the king acknowledges they're unnecessarily restrictive. Women's autonomy advances 1 loosened glove button at a time. The rhetoric is triumphant, perhaps overly so, but they're not entirely wrong. The glove relaxation is part of larger social changes that will eventually lead to women's suffrage. Though that outcome is still years away, you find yourself caught between relief and nostalgia. Relief because the daily burden of glove perfection is genuinely decreasing. You can wear slightly more comfortable gloves. Remove them in more contexts. Spend less money maintaining impossibly high standards. but nostalgia because you've invested so much of yourself in mastering the Victorian system that its dissolution feels like devaluing expertise you worked hard to acquire. I spent years learning these rules. You confessed to your friend Margaret over tea, both of you wearing the new looser-style gloves that would have horrified your mothers a decade ago. Now they're telling us the rules weren't that important after all. It's like discovering you've been training for a race that's been cancelled. Margaret nods sympathetically. But think of Charlotte, she says, referring to your niece. She'll come of age in a world where gloves are accessories rather than requirements. She'll choose comfort over perfection without social penalty. Isn't that worth sacrificing our hard-won expertise? The question haunts you. Is it worth it? You don't know? The Victorian glove system was oppressive. Certainly expensive and uncomfortable and absurd. But it was also something you'd mastered. Something that gave you status and confidence within its constrained parameters. Its loosening liberates you from suffering but also destabilizes your understanding of your place in the world. The Edwardian era is still young, and glove standards are still evolving. You don't know where they'll settle, perhaps somewhere between Victorian rigidity and complete abandonment. A middle ground that balances propriety with practicality. Or perhaps the trajectory is toward complete dissolution, toward a future where gloves are genuinely optional, where women appear in public with bare hands without scandal or consequence. You're not sure you'll live to see that future, but you're certain your niece Charlotte will, and you hope she'll appreciate the freedom that's being purchased, slowly and painfully, by your generation's willingness to question what the previous generation insisted was unquestionable. The King's relaxed glove standards aren't revolution. They're not even radical reform. They're incremental evolution, small steps toward a more flexible social order. But in a world where glove buttons have carried the weight of civilization's survival, even small steps feel momentous. You're walking through history as it shifts, watching rigid Victorian certainty give way to Edwardian ambiguity, and you're wearing slightly looser gloves while you do it. You're attending your niece Charlotte's wedding in 1923, and the contrast with your own wedding 2 decades earlier could not be more stark. Charlotte stands at the altar wearing elbow-length lace gloves that she'll remove during the ring ceremony, something that would have caused genuine scandal at your wedding, where gloves stayed on throughout the entire service, forcing you to struggle with ring placement over fabric and causing your new husband visible frustration. The guests assembled in the church display glove choices that span a remarkable spectrum. Elderly ladies, the last generation trained under Victoria herself, wear traditional full-length white kid leather, perfectly fitted, unchanged from patterns established 50 years ago. Middle-aged women, your contemporaries, wear various compromises between tradition and modernity. Young women, Charlotte's friends, wear fashionable short gloves, coloured gloves, even a few brave souls with no gloves at all, and no one faints or calls for smelling salts. Your mother, now quite elderly, sits beside you looking bewildered by the casual glove attitude surrounding her. "In my day," she whispers, though it comes out louder than a whisper, "appearing at a wedding without gloves would have been as shocking as appearing without shoes. Standards have collapsed entirely." But have they collapsed? Or have they simply evolved into something different? Something that allows for individual choice rather than rigid conformity? You watch Charlotte navigate her ceremony with obvious comfort. No nervous adjustments of tight gloves. No anxiety about white glove tests or perfect presentation. She's experiencing her wedding as a genuine emotional event rather than a performance of glove protocol. And you feel simultaneously envious and grateful that she has this freedom. The reception demonstrates how thoroughly glove culture has transformed. guests remove gloves for the meal without requiring hostess permission. Several women wear gloves for the receiving line, then casually take them off for dancing. A few young women arrive already gloveless, and while some older guests notice and disapprove, no one suggests they should leave or change. The once absolute requirements have become suggestions, preferences, matters of personal choice rather than social law. You find yourself in conversation with Lady Worthington, who at 75 represents the last living link to Queen Victoria's court. She's wearing gloves, naturally habit so deeply ingrained it's probably impossible to break at her age. But even she acknowledges the changes. "I sometimes think we were ridiculous," she confesses quietly. "All that suffering over hand coverings, all those ruined gloves, wasted money, damaged hands, and for what to prove we could endure discomfort to separate ourselves from working women, the purposes seem rather thin when examined in retrospect." The admission stuns you. Lady Worthington was one of the strictest enforcers of glove protocol in your youth, a woman whose disapproving glance at imperfect gloves could ruin a season. Hearing her question the entire system suggests that even the truest believers are reconsidering the religion they once preached. Your daughter Emily, 16 and preparing for her own eventual debut, approaches wearing fingerless lace gloves that would have gotten her expelled from any Victorian social function. They're fashionable now, considered chic rather than scandalous. Emily has never experienced the white glove test. She's never spent 3 months waiting for bespoke gloves from a master glover. She's never worn gloves in summer heat until her hands blistered. The entire apparatus of suffering you endured is simply absent from her experience. "Mother," she asks, examining your own gloves, a comfortable pair in soft grey. Nothing like the rigid perfection you once maintained. "Why did women wear such uncomfortable gloves? Grandmother tells stories that sound like torture. How do you explain it? How do you make her understand a system that now seems incomprehensible even to those who lived through it?" You try. "We wore them because everyone wore them. Because not wearing them meant social death. Because we believed, or were told to believe, that covered hands represented civilization, refinement, separation from animals and lower classes. Because questioning the system seemed more dangerous than enduring it." Emily considers this, then says something that hits you like a physical blow. That sounds exactly like what the suffragettes said about women not having the vote, that we accepted it because questioning seemed dangerous. But we have the vote now. We questioned and won. The parallel is obvious once stated. The glove system and political disenfranchisement were part of the same structure mechanisms for controlling women, for forcing conformity, for making autonomy seem impossible. Gloves were trivial compared to voting rights. Certainly, but they were practiced for the same submission, training in accepting unreasonable constraints without protest. You walk through Charlotte's reception, observing the hands around you, some gloved, some bare, some in between. The variety itself represents a revolution. For the first time in generations, women can choose how to cover or not cover their hands based on comfort, preference, fashion, or practicality rather than rigid social requirements. The choice is the thing. The freedom to decide for yourself rather than having a queen, a society, a system decide for you. Historians are already writing about the Victorian glove phenomenon, you've noticed. Books analysing what they call the tyranny of minor requirements and fashion as social control. Some historians argue that glove obsession was essentially harmless, a quirk of a particular era with no lasting consequences. Others contend it was part of a larger system that kept women focused on trivial concerns: gloves, hemlines, proper calling card etiquette rather than substantial issues like education, property rights, and political participation. You suspect both interpretations hold truth. Gloves were simultaneously trivial and significant, absurd and meaningful, harmless fashion and instruments of control. They were what you made of them. Some women experienced them purely as accessories, while others felt them as chains. A quirky footnote to the entire glove era, several museums are now collecting Victorian gloves as historical artefacts, preserving them alongside dresses, jewellery, and other period items. You donated several pairs from your collection last year, including the supreme glass kid gloves from Madame Celeste that you wore to your presentation before Queen Victoria. The museum curator examined them with reverence, pointing out the invisible stitching, the perfect construction, the evidence of the obsessive craftsmanship that went into something designed to be worn a few times and discarded. These gloves tell a story, the curator said, about an era that valued appearance over comfort, conformity over individuality, social performance over authentic experience. They're beautiful and terrible in equal measure. You couldn't have described them better yourself. Charlotte approaches you after the first dance, her gloves now completely removed and forgotten somewhere. "Aunt," she says, taking your still-gloved hands in her bare ones, a gesture that would have been shockingly intimate in your youth. "Thank you for everything you taught me about navigating society, but I'm grateful I'm coming of age now, when I can choose my own path rather than following rules made by people who died before I was born." You squeeze her hands, feeling the warmth of her skin directly against your glove leather, and realise this is the first time in your life you've held someone's bare hands in public without anxiety. The freedom of that moment, the simple human contact without barriers or protocol, brings tears to your eyes. The glove wars are over. You think, your side, if you can even identify which side you were on, didn't exactly win or lose. The entire battlefield simply became obsolete, rendered irrelevant by time and changing values. Young women like Charlotte and Emily will make their own mistakes, follow their own absurd fashions, create their own unnecessary suffering. But it won't be over, gloves. That particular form of torture has run its course. As evening deepens and the reception continues, you notice your own gloves have become uncomfortable. They're not tight, you've worn only comfortable gloves for years now, but they're suddenly unbearable. You want them off. You want to feel air on your hands, to experience the world without barriers, to join Charlotte and the other young women in their casual bare-handedness. So you remove them, slowly, deliberately, in the middle of a conversation with Lady Pemberton, who's also removed hers. You set them on a nearby table where they lie crumpled and forgotten, and you flex your fingers, feeling genuinely free for perhaps the first time in your adult life. Your mother notices and makes a small sound of distress, but she doesn't say anything. Even she recognizes that the world has moved on, that her protests are echoes of a dead era. You catch her eye and smile, trying to communicate something gratitude for the standards she taught you, recognition that those standards served a purpose in their time, but also gentle insistence that their time has passed. The wedding ends late, as good weddings should. You return home with your gloves in your handbag rather than on your hands, and the next morning you wake to a world that suddenly feels different. You look at the drawer full of gloves you've accumulated over decades, hundreds of pairs in various styles, colours, materials, each representing some occasion or requirement or aspiration. Most you'll never wear again. You consider donating them all to the museum, turning your entire glove collection into historical artefacts. But instead, you select one pair, those original supreme glass kid gloves from Madame Celeste, the ones you wore to meet Queen Victoria, the ones that cost more than some families earned in half a year. You place them in a special box with a note for Charlotte. These gloves represent an era when covering one's hands mattered more than almost anything. May you never need to wear anything so perfect and so uncomfortable, but may you remember that your freedom was purchased by generations of women who wore their prisons beautifully while working to dismantle them. You seal the box and set it aside. Then you walk to the window and look out at London, stretching before you a city transforming faster than anyone could have predicted, shedding Victorian constraints like a snake shedding skin. Women walk the streets below, some with gloves, many without, all exercising the simple freedom to choose for themselves, the glove obsession that defined your youth, that governed your presentation to the Queen, that nearly destroyed Charlotte's mother socially, that prompted medical debates and suffragette protests and children's tears, all of it fading into history, becoming one more incomprehensible Victorian eccentricity that future generations will study and wonder about. You're glad you lived through it. You're grateful you survived it, and you're profoundly relieved it's over. Your hands, finally free, rest comfortably at your sides. No gloves, no anxiety, no judgment. Just hands, doing what hands were meant to do, feel the world directly, touch life without barriers, exist without constant performance of perfection. The tyranny of minor requirements has ended, at least this particular one, and in its ending you find a quiet, surprising joy. The afternoon light fades gently through Charlotte's wedding memories, and you find yourself years later, sitting in a comfortable chair by the window, your hands now elderly hands, marked by time and experience resting peacefully in your lap. No gloves, they rest nearby on the side table, waiting should you choose them, but no longer demanding, no longer insisting on their necessity. The choice itself has become the freedom. You think of all those women, generations of them, who wore their prisons beautifully because they knew no alternative, because the cost of rebellion seemed too high, because the system was so complete they could barely imagine its absence. You were one of them, and you survived, and you witnessed the slow transformation that made survival evolve into something closer to actual freedom. Your granddaughter visits sometimes, young and bright and unburdened by the knowledge of what women once endured over something as simple as hand coverings. She doesn't understand when you try to explain it, and that's exactly as it should be. Some suffering doesn't need to be understood by those who never experienced it. Some prisons, once opened, should be forgotten entirely. The sun sets slowly over London, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, and your hands rest easy, remembering everything, carrying all those stories. But finally, at peace. The gloves remain on the table, beautiful artifacts from another time. No longer chains, no longer requirements, simply memories of when covering one's hands seemed to matter more than almost anything else in the world. You close your eyes, breathing slowly, feeling the soft evening air on your skin, on your hands, on the places that are hidden for so long and are now revealed without consequence, without judgment, without the weight of a society's expectations pressing down on every finger, every gesture, every moment of existence. The story settles around you like a comfortable blanket, and sleep comes gently, peacefully, to hands that no longer carry the burden of perfection,